Okay, I think I have everything going here. Let me just double check. Okay, this is the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group for Wednesday, February 27th, 2019. This is a broadcast from the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute and is a public teaching in English. Okay, let me usually get my video on here, and let's just do that. All right, there I am. Adjustments. All right, well, welcome to the group, Keshe Plasma Reactor Group, once again here. Seems to come around awful quick these days. The older I get, the faster time goes, it seems. But on the other hand, the more interesting life is getting as well. Let me see, we have some attendees and panelists here, and I think we're ready to get into today's show. And as usual, I never really know how it's going to go, and we kind of wing it and play it by the seat of the pants, as they say. And it's interesting for me. Something I've been doing recently is looking into the past plasma reactor group, the past of the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group, you could say, and looking at some of the roots where it began and some of the original videos and materials from back in the day. And it's quite interesting. It started back in about 2012, and by 2013 we had regular meetings, and we're starting to play with different ideas for reactors, and Mr. Keshe was starting to interact with us. And by 2013 we ended up branching off and starting the public teaching workshop series with Mr. Keshe. There was 10 of those over a period of a year. And that was an offshoot of the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group. And then those public teaching workshops later extended into the Knowledge Seekers workshops. And 2014 we started the first Knowledge Seekers workshop. So there's an interesting background to the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group, and it had a pretty big influence, and still does in many ways. And how the group has transformed or changed over the years. We used to be very, excuse me, I gotta remove the ring chime bell. There we go.
Back again.
Pardon me, John?
No. That was me coming back again because I didn't listen to you.
All right, I'll make you a co-host again there. And yep, your mic's working good now. Thanks. So in any case, some interesting things happened in the past and will continue to happen here. There's been a transformation, as I was saying, in the way this group operates, or the way we go about things now. In the original group, the big thing was about specifically about the Keshe reactors, and pretty much the ones that were in the patent or was demonstrated in one of Mr. Keshe's videos. That's about all we had to go off of. There's a bit of information in the books, which one of the first things that we did. Most of us in the group got the books, and the three books that were published by Mr. Keshe at that time, which, by the way, are out of print for the physical edition so far. They'll be coming in later on this year, but there is an Amazon Kindle edition available, and apparently it's able to be played on any device as far as being able to read the books. So far, the first two books of Mr. Keshe have been published through Amazon, and you can download them and use an app to read it on any pad or iPhone or computer. You can also do it directly through a web browser instead of the app, and or you can use the Kindle device, which some people like as well. Anyways, so in the early part of the groups of the Keshe Plasma Reactor group, we were focused on how to create these reactors, and how do we get energy from it, or how do we create these gravitational lift effects. And that was the main thing that we were concerned about at that time. There's a lot of talk about free energy and trying to develop a self-sustaining energy generator. And if it could also supply lift and positive positioning, well, that was certainly a big bonus as well, but that would be the more advanced aspect of the simple core basic power unit. So we try to follow the instructions in the Keshe patent application, which is quite explicit. There's many diagrams, there's lots of descriptions on the how and why, and bits and pieces on how to do it and so on. But some of the hardware specs were missing, and we needed to find ways of developing out the physicality reactor. How do you create a rotating reactor that also has a high vacuum condition inside, and at the same time has the ability to add gases, I say, not ganses, because gases were what we were talking about in the early days of the Keshe Plasma Reactor group. We didn't even really know about ganses until a bit later, and the whole nanocoating process that became developed by Mr. Keshe, or the idea was developed out through the group, and he would give us hints that about special coatings, and then he would tell us later how to do it, and so on and so forth. So it was a bit by bit revealing the details of how the process worked, and the specifics on what vacuum pressure should be in there, what gas pressure should be in the inside the reactor, and the importance of cleanliness, not touching anything with your bare hands, using surgical gloves to interact with the reactor, because it was important not to have any amino acids or other oils or anything from the fingers. The reactor had to be totally clean inside, because under a high vacuum condition, everything off gases, and oils can off gas and continually give off big chunky particles that should not be inside the reactor in the ideal condition. The idea was to have it totally vacuumed out to begin with, and then just introduce the gases such as hydrogen, helium, argon, xenon, and neon, xenon, and so on, as I say. So on is the gases beyond neon and xenon. And also special emphasis was given to what is the ignition factor? How do you get the plasma instigated? How do you get it started inside this rotating spherical reactor with these, under a vacuum condition, with these gases whirling around in there, whirling around in layers, because the gases layer themselves according to their weight, with the lighter gases in the center, like hydrogen would be in the center, and then helium, then argon, and then neon and xenon. And I think, in my personal opinion, there's one missing gas that could be very useful in a reactor, under controlled conditions and under the direction of those who know how to work with it. And that final gas would be radon, which is the radioactive gas, and is the heaviest gas in the at room temperature of all the elements. There is natural radon in our atmosphere now, and it's considered a toxin in terms of the that's the second leading cause of lung cancer in humans. But it also could be trapped in a reactor, and perhaps even, we had an idea in the early, at least I had an idea in the early group, to trap radon and use it within a reactor in a home, because in Canada and in many countries, radon is a big problem. It's a gas. It builds up in the basement of your home. So the reason why is because most homes have a nice solid concrete foundation. But it turns out, and they're we pride ourselves on airtight houses now with really good insulation and tight windows and no air leaks and so on. So what happens is the radon gas comes up through it actually permeates through the concrete, and then it's like a bathtub for the radon gas. It's heavy and it stays in the basement and kind of hangs out in the as a heavy gas in the basements of homes. And of course, most of the time that heating and ventilation comes from the basement, and so it gets spread through the home, and people get poisoned by it. So the remediation for radon, generally, when they have radon detectors and you can detect it and then take steps to remove the radon from your home. And the general procedure, strangely enough, is you take a tube and stick it into the basement, and it goes out through the roof, and you have a fan in that tube that basically goes full time, blowing air out of the basement out into the atmosphere. Or you might say out into your neighbor's yard or your own yard, because radon is a heavy gas and would probably drop from where it gets dumped out. So it might end up dumping into your own backyard, and your kids are getting the radon gas there. So it's not a brilliant idea for removing the radon gas, in my estimation, but that's what the authorities recommend at this point. So my idea would be to actually contain the radon gas within the reactor and allow it circulate the air in the basement through the reactor, and as it spins, it would collect that heavier gas in the outer perimeter of the reactor, and it would build up over time. And the more it built up, the more the reactor would be empowered, you might say. So eventually this little reactor would be powering your whole house, would be the theory on it, because that radon could lead to a chain reaction inside the reactor to be the initiating factor in order to activate the inner core and have it ionize and become the reactor that it could be. Of course, Mr. Keshe had other ways of stirring the reactor in the early days, and that led to some problems with the authorities, and because of some low-level beta type radiation activity that was to be used. Later, I believe it was scintillated helium was the initiating factor for getting the reaction going inside the reactor. And some people at that time were experimenting with gases and with different aspects of the reactor technology. Remember, Gert was one of them. He had a nice setup with being able to control gases and vacuum and so on. And then we ran into issues with the type of materials for the reactors, and we couldn't use stainless steel because that was not conducive to retaining a plasma inside the reactor. You'd think stainless would be a great material. That's what almost every reactor is made out of that is commercially available. You'll see these high vacuum condition chambers, and they're almost always stainless steel. Some might be other materials, but generally they're stainless steel because it doesn't tend to off gas in a vacuum condition very much, and it's stable and doesn't corrode and so on. It's strong. But it's got a downside of that it will basically not allow the plasma to sustain itself. It will tend to ground out the plasma. It's a matter level wall of this reactor. You can imagine this sphere. We have a volunteer sphere here. It's usually one within reach. We have a volunteer sphere here, and you can imagine this sphere having the gases inside and getting activated and so on. And so it was the bottom line is that it was an interesting time. We learned all kinds of aspects of how to get the gases into this rotating sphere and how to extract the gas, all the atmospheric condition that's in there to start with, the oxygen, nitrogen, and so on. All that's got to be out of there. All of the nitrogen and oxygen just interferes with the plasma condition inside is the idea. So we worked theoretically and practically to try to attain that vacuum, that mysterious vacuum condition, which is essentially the way it is in space. Space is beyond our atmosphere is a vacuum condition, never a total vacuum, which is what we might have been told in the early days when we were young. But it's almost impossible to attain a total, probably is impossible to attain a total vacuum. There's always a few particles, even if there's only one hydrogen particle in a whole cubic meter of space, then which is about the minimum for space. One hydrogen per cubic meters. Space has almost always more than that through the universe, apparently. And So in the same way, the reactor has to be like the conditions of space. And we try to start out with the voidness. You create a voidness, a nothingness to start with, and then just add what you want to, what you need, only the bare necessities, the bare essentials for what you need to sustain a reaction. And in space, if we look at the way stars are born and sustain themselves and so on, it's not a highly complex structure in terms of having a huge variety of elements and so on involved. There's often only some stars, like perhaps our sun, we're told there's only a couple of elements that are prime to it, which is hydrogen and helium, and that reaction that is occurring. So limited number of gases, and starting with in a void condition, and that's kind of where it all began, I guess, is the point of this little dissertation here. Anybody have any questions about that time or anything that was going on at that point, the early days of the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group? I think people here would not know about that in a way, and some of the early meetings were not recorded, and some of them are kind of funky and not published. Some are lost in our archive somewhere. But we did have some very interesting things. I've got some that I've restored from 2014, and that'll be interesting. I'll get them put up on the playlist for the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group, and that might be interesting for people to review. There was some really cool things that we got into, and different aspects, different ideas that were inspired by the knowledge that came out at that time. And there's all Guy and I were coming up with half a dozen different types of reactors every week, pretty much, just in our little rap session before the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group when we started the show. And quite a few of them I would have a drawing of, and I've got a thick pile of papers, and I plan on going through them and putting together a little video of some of the early ideas, because some of them were very core to the teaching at that time, and could be applicable even now as we've supposedly moved forward from the original ideas and the patent of Mr. Keshe of the rotating spherical reactor, and trying to go with the non-rotating physicality reactor, and having instead the fields rotating, or using ganses and other materials in certain ways and different kinds of fields. But in the early days, there was some real potential was there, and still is in my mind, for creating a reactor that can generate power and or lift, and or new materials, or supply food and that kind of thing as well. But that wasn't initially what we were focusing on. After a couple of years of the plasma group, that became more important. Those aspects, agricultural and health aspects, started to work into it more and more.
Rick, what was the initial focus of that group? Because I wasn't there at the time.
What was the initial focus of the group?
Yeah.
Well, I wrote something down. Let me just read it here. I said, the way I put it, it was a Skype group that was formed in early 2012 as a common place that knowledge seekers could exchange ideas about building Keshe reactors. So the idea was that there wasn't much knowledge at that time. And when I found out about the Keshe reactor through the first videos that Mr. Keshe had, where he had a little magnetic board and he was moving the electron and proton and showing the neutron and how things worked in the universe and so on. And he was in front of this fire and he was saying how it's time for mankind to stop the burning, which really got my attention. Like, whoa, that's profound. And describing how the electron worked and all this kind of thing. Well, he, let's see how it, he inspired me, I guess you'd say. And then when he actually had the reactor in his hand and was casually showing this plasma reactor that was the key to the entire future of power, lift, and all these somewhat miraculous things, and that it was sort of all inclusive, could do everything kind of reactor that created fields and all this. And I was just amazed, and I wanted to know more about it and how does it work and can we create one ourselves, and you know what's involved. And so I'd been interested before that in what we call free energy and how to generate power from self-sufficient means was a big focus of my life. And the works of Nikola Tesla became important to me before the plasma group. And that's what I was focusing on at the time, was Tesla's disk turbine, which he considered to be the greatest of all of his inventions. And he had over 600 inventions. Considered the greatest one, the one he showed on his 50th birthday so proudly to the world, expecting the world to accept it and change all of their internal combustion engines over to his turbine, which didn't happen, unfortunately. And instead he got basically blackballed by those industrialists group at that time. In any case, I was pushing for the Tesla turbine as at least an interim way to produce energy and so on. And then I discovered the Keshe teachings and this little reactor thing, and I just went, whoa, all of the stuff I learned is basically out the window. It seems trivial instead of a solution to everything. It's more like it's just a trivial, maybe a baby step to get to where we need to go. But it's not even relevant to this whole world of plasma technology that was revealed through the Keshe teachings. So back at that time, I got excited and became a transcriber and worked with the webmaster and helped to get things up and down on the website, and just kind of got involved. And that led to starting the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group. I think Vince and Armin and a couple others, we were doing some experiments on our own. Like Armin was working with high voltage and creating plasmas and this kind of thing. And I was doing some of the same and other kinds of experiments with the turbine and whatnot, and other high voltage experiments. Magnets were big at that time, magnetics, and creating other kinds of fields and detecting fields and all of that before the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group. So the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group was a natural transition in a way. And I'd already started a few people getting together once a week for for a dinner sort of gathering where we would share a meal and discuss about free energy and other ideas that were sort of associated with that whole world. But once I grokked or understood that the Keshe teaching or technology was, let's say, more than a step beyond everything else, it became the focus of attention. How can we get involved with creating these reactors, and what's involved with it? What are the actual nuts and bolts, or so to speak, but it's a term, but what is the physicality approach to actually constructing such things, rather than just a theory or an idea or a concept? How do we actually put it into something that works? And later we would get clues on the ones that Mr. Keshe had put together, his reactors from when he was in Iran that he was working with, and other ones that he was working with, various prototypes at that time that he showed and gave hints of in his lectures and so on. So I decided it's time to run with it, and it became not just a free energy kind of get-together group, but an actual Keshe plasma reactor group. And it was a big move at that time because we were essentially opening up the group to the public, to anybody who wanted to join, first of all. And a bit later, we actually broadcast the group. So it started out as a private Skype group, but then ended up on Justin TV, and which was the live streaming app at that time, and through Skype and Justin TV and so on. And that was in 2000, and I think late 2012, early 2013. That became really interesting because, like, people with like Armin and Vince and so on had a lot to contribute at that time, and we would have some great discussions. Ludmill was there and some others, and so we got a little group together, and we would show pictures and videos from each other's labs, or what we called our labs. But for me, it's my living room lab, because that's what I've converted my living room into. And for Vince, it was his outbuilding lab, where he'd have 3 or 4 heaters going, trying to keep warm at 30 below weather. And Ludmill had his basement lab that he had set up with his vacuum pump and so on, running, creating a vacuum condition, because that was the important factor, as I kind of hinted at earlier with our chambers, was how do you vacuum it out, and how do you create as perfect of a vacuum condition as you can. And it's definitely easier said than done. It's a very tricky deal. Mr. Keshe would come into the plasma group and give us suggestions on how we could accomplish it, and that he used these really expensive and powerful vacuum pumps, double vacuum pump setups and so on. So this is what we tried to get together. And of course, at first we didn't have any support for that kind of thing, And I remember the vacuum pump we used initially was a little hand vacuum pump thing that you could get for automotive use and other uses to create a vacuum condition in vacuum hoses and whatnot. And one of the early videos is Paul, one of the early participants, Paul and Guy were early adopters of the Keshe plasma reactor group. And Paul was there with this hand squeezed, this kind of a trigger kind of deal that would create a vacuum condition. It was hooked up to a little vacuum chamber that I put together. And it would be hard work to vacuum that thing down, and it would leak, and he'd have to just go at it like crazy. And I'd be there in the vacuum chamber watching what changes would occur and so on. And it was pretty funky, but we actually had some, for us, rather astounding kind of results, and we had fun with it, let's say. And we played around with some high voltage and in a vacuum chamber and that kind of thing. And of course, Mr. Keshe came along and told us that, oh, I never use high voltage in my reactors, and kind of put a damper on us because he just said it was just the matter level electrons were, just the glow of the matter level electrons when they return to their state and so on. And it wasn't a real plasma. What's a real plasma? The plasma in a plasma ball would not be a real plasma. So this is something that stumped us at that time, and Armin and I, especially, and some others that were playing with high voltage Ludmill, we were like, okay, well, how can we get the plasma? How can we see the light? How do we get it to ignite and become a field producing, full strength, power producing plasma? And it was perplexing because we didn't know how to go about it. And the only way we could see any real physicality changes is by injecting this vacuum chamber with high voltage. And there's lots of very interesting effects, as I've showed a couple of weeks ago with, if I have it here. Let's see. It's different. I don't have it handy right now, but showing the layers of the called the Faraday discs inside of the vacuum chamber. In fact, there's that very vacuum chamber right there around the tip of my finger. And I created these, Guy and I are together working with it, created these plasma discs inside the chamber. It was pretty cool. We were kind of excited about that, using magnets and so on inside the chamber to alter the fields and create different conditions and all that. But basically that was not as productive as we had hoped. There might be ways of making that work still, but it's still putting too much power in and not getting enough back out. You can initiate certain kinds of ionization, but not the kind you want for creating a true plasma inside the reactor, was the information we got at that time from Mr. Keshe. So we had to kind of start in a different direction, which has occurred many times in the Keshe plasma reactor group, that we've had to kind of regroup and rethink what we're doing and go in a different direction, as guided by Mr. Keshe. He always seemed to have another way of doing things. And as he said one time, there's as many types of reactors as there are stars in the universe. And I always thought that was a beautiful quote, but it's also mind-boggling in the sense that that could actually be true, that there's literally an infinite number of combinations that could be types of reactors. And there's so many different interactions that could take place, and different materials that could be created, different conditions. And it seems every human being has a different way of going about it, a different way of conceiving what a reactor is and how to create it. And when we're confronted with our own ingenuity, our own what kind of reactor are you going to create today? And not based on what everyone else does, but what does your reactor look like? And at that time, we had all kinds of different materials came up. One person, John, was working with ceramic as a type of reactor. Turns out that might be something that's still very relevant. There are types of ceramics that could be excellent reactors. And ceramics have become more and more important in the last few years for nanotechnology and the world of ceramics and so on. Other reactors were made out of stainless steel, which, as I mentioned earlier, is not the best material for reactors for various reasons, mainly that it stops the flow of the plasma. The plasma is a plasma. It's in a plasmatic condition. It does not like matter level to slam up against matter level. It's got to either convert the matter level or be dissipated by the matter level. And if it's a weak plasma trying to get going in life, maybe bumping up against that cold stainless steel wall is just not very good advice for this young plasma. So it's preferable. A plasma would like to be able to bounce off of the walls. So the idea that we were told at that time is you have to create a surface that contains the plasma, that the plasma recognizes as one of its own and is essentially just naturally bounces off, naturally is repelled by it. So, of course, Mr. Keshe in his way would gradually release this information, not tell us everything about how to do everything all at once, because we had to come to the realization ourselves. Why was it so important to create this special coating, which later we came to know as a nano coating? This special, taking the copper in particular and creating that black nano coating on the surface. So people like Gert, who had this beautiful stainless steel reactor all bolted together and who's able to create a vacuum condition in and so on, had to resort to how does he make a stainless sphere into a copper sphere? First of all, it wouldn't work that big under a vacuum condition. It would have to be quite thick or it tend to collapse fairly easily. And what was he to do? Well, he was quite innovative, and he was able to essentially copper coat by electrolysis to plate copper onto the stainless steel. I think he used nickel or something as a layer in between the copper. But he put it, pardon me?
Intermediary.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And in any case, the copper was the final layer just inside the reactor. It didn't have to be outside. It was inside this, this beautiful stainless reactor, is about this big or so. And so he created this copper surface and then nano-coated that copper surface using the caustic procedure. So that was an interesting way to create that plasmatic interface. So now when the plasma goes against the wall of that reactor, it would see plasma as its reflection, you could say. And plasma against plasma, they build up strong magnetic fields and repel often, or could interact. But in the case of the nano coating, it's generally a repelling type insulating mechanism that's occurring. The plasma's in the multiple layers of the nano coating. You could have 30, 40,000 layers. In between all those layers is where the plasma flows. And when this other plasmatic field comes even close to those other plasma fields, it just naturally repels off. It doesn't want to mesh and dissipate into the metal or things like that might normally occur. And according to some of the research I did at that time, I found out that copper oxide, the black copper oxide, is actually a perfect coating for inside of nuclear reactors, because there's some types of nuclear reactors, because it's a type of coating that they say it self-heals. So if you have a high energy gamma ray, I guess it would be coming from the radioactivity of this reactor core with the high radioactive materials and so on that they use in these things, unlike the Keshe reactors, then the walls, when that ray hits, it will knock off the atoms from the wall of the reactor and weaken it. The idea with the nano coating is when that gets knocked off, it gets almost instantly or fairly quickly healed. It's a self-healing type substance. It's actually always growing. It's always creating layers, and there's some layers are being dissipated, but it's always creating layers from the bottom up, from the root structure of that core copper physicality element. It's creating new nano layers. They're growing. It's a growing substance. So this was interesting that we were told about that. And of course, later when people like Armin were going to the Spaceship Institute to become the knowledge seekers at that time, they learned about these nano coating processes and applied them to many types of reactors at that time, both rotating and non-rotating, and virtually everything was nano coated. So that became the way at that time. And
Rick, I have a question, or a suggestion rather, as you're telling the story, because since I wasn't there, I came during the GANS era. I went through the patent, and the patent actually has quite a bit of detail about many of the things which I've never seen anywhere. So I'm just curious what role did the patents play during this time as you guys were exploring various things, because there is a lot of connection, and it's really fascinating about understanding many things.
That's right. That's right. In fact, the patent had a big connection, because in the first show, I had my video camera kind of going this way, and on the filing cabinet here, I still have, you can see the Keshe patent here, another Keshe patent down here. And I had those on the filing cabinet, and Mr. Keshe noticed. And that became topic, and that was part of, I would show the pictures regularly. We would discuss the different aspects, and Mr. Keshe would talk about, you know, like the different, it shows the hydrogen, helium. Well, people have seen that in the patent pictures, and argon, and you know, shows how different the magnetic fields and how they interact, and all the ins and outs. It's all in the patent. It's very detailed and tells you how it works in the universe, how it works on the level of the patents, how it works on the level of the human body, and basically lays it all out in exquisite detail, and shows many, many different ways that this interaction of the fields could be accomplished for various different reasons and results. So it was definitely, the patent was a big part of our conversation at that time. In fact, we didn't have a lot else to go off of as far as details go. And so once I recognized it, it took a while to recognize the patent. When I first looked at it, I just went, oh, this is too complicated. I can't get my head. What is all this stuff in here that seems to claim to be a solution for virtually everything and can do everything? What? It can't be. What? This is mind-boggling. And how could it be something like 110 pages? 110 pages of patent claiming with claims that would obviously mean everything on the planet, the way we understand it, would have to change. All of our sources of energy and virtually everything. Tomas, your microphone's open. I don't know if you want to talk, but it's not coming through very well.
Rick, one of the things about the patent that's quite fascinating to me is that it describes the operation of planet Earth. And I went through every detail I could. I read many times the whole thing, as you may have guessed.
You have to read one. A human being, to me, a human being would have to read that patent many times in order to even start to understand what it contains. That's where I'm. Even if you're at a top level of scientist, it would still require that, I believe. Go ahead.
The interesting thing is that everything in the patent applies to even the reactor without any physicality. And this is the most interesting part about the patent for me. Even the disk reactors or the reactors with like 2 magravs or 2 disk reactors interacting in a non-physical fashion, all of the patent applies to all of these things. So, and the interesting thing that patents points to, and this is why I think it is so important in this plasma reactor context, is that the physical rendition that was done through the patents using the reactors that Mr. Keshe explored many things, in order to understand the parameter space of non-physical or like GANs reactor, one has to understand how these fields are formed. And this is done very clearly and in a very well laid out fashion in the reactors, in the patent. And I think in designing any reactor, for example, I mean, I was thinking about making the lights as I was reading the patent, and I think it's very important to read the patents before one make the light, because I think I understand, but it will require some exploration of the range of parameters one has to manipulate. But one can do essentially the same thing with field plasma. And anyway, these are my thoughts, but I think it's very important. And many of the activities such as sunspot and solar flare, things like that become very clear. as you read the patents, and how these are plasma phenomena, and also like dust devil that you see in the deserts or in the streets. Things like that also becomes clear. And so
exactly.
Very fascinating. And last time in the Knowledge Seeker workshop, you were doing these two spirals with your hand in the bathtub. I have actually seen these kind of phenomena in deserts, the exact same thing. We see this all the time. And we also see that the tornadoes that we have in the tropical part, we have like many cases of tornadoes which pull up houses or cows, and they've dropped them somewhere else intact. So that's lift and motion, actually. So
you bet. There's one in particular of a cyclone in the Midwest in the U.S. that the sheriff can be heard saying, and we can see 6 vehicles that are rotating in the core of the storm now, and had 6 trucks were literally about a few hundred meters high in the sky, rotating around. They estimated they were doing over 260 miles an hour, and it totally ripped and tore it basically shredded these vehicles and dumped them onto the ground later. I couldn't believe it.
One of the interesting thing is that in some portion of the storm, they don't destroy it. They just take the house from one location to another. And this is not a very high speed, these rotations in the storm. I mean, yes.
Well, the center, you think about it, the center of the cyclone, as they say, is there's stillness and silence.
Exactly. And that's what, this is the inside of the craft, so to speak, of a lift mechanism. And they put the house down somewhere else, intact, or cows. I mean, we have evidence here. I mean, we are in tropical regions. And so this is very fascinating. And the dust devils and the stuff that you did in the bathtub are essentially the same phenomena. And the rotational speed is not that high.
Yes, and if you look at the way the arms go and so on in that vortex, it's very much like the way the galaxies form and have these arms that come out, and the rotation of the galaxies. And you start to understand that, like when I create a vortex in the bathtub, I might inscribe a circle this big, but it's the center core that's actually the important part that gets created from the outer part spinning. So the outer creates the inner, but the inner is the core, and it's the actual little black hole that shows up in that bathtub example. And that black hole, which is like a shadow basically, but it looks black in the bathtub, and just like the black hole of the galaxy or other galaxies, and and it the way it moves around and so on as a core, and retains its coreness, it retains its plasmatic entityness because of that rotation. Rotation is what gives it its stick-to-itiveness, that allows it to retain its structure. So multiplied to if we look at every proton as being the same thing, basically, a rotating structure like that, then that's it's the same structure through the entire universe in all scales. And this is a great thing, I think, about the Keshe patent, is the, what do you call it, interscalarness of it. Like you're saying, there's different, you can use the descriptions in the patent to apply to the non-physical rotating reactor systems, for example. And
speaking of which, I have a question. I'm trying to locate a document that is referred to in that annex, which I haven't been able to. Maybe you can. It's a paper that Mr. Keshe wrote on Saturn. and the rings of Saturn. And he has a description of the formation of the rings of Saturn, which is actually, I would be very interested to get a hold of that one. And I haven't been able to find it anywhere. So do you know where it can be found?
I don't know offhand, or if that paper might have been included in the books somewhere.
I looked at in the books, I didn't see it.
Okay.
So it's somewhere, but I would be very interested because the annex had some of his papers kind of put to in like the black hole, and there are several others. But that one I'm very interested because there are several references to it regarding dynamics, certain dynamics of the plasma, and the Saturn paper is referred to it in several places. So I'm very interested. If you can get a hold of it, I would be very interested to have it. And I also looked at the Keshe bookstore in the US as well as the main one, and nothing like that shows up in the list in terms of the ones they are selling. But I would be very interested to get hold of that one.
Okay, yes, I agree. That would be a good thing. Just having a look at share here, one of the patents, and I think it's the one with the annex in the back. Let's see.
If you go in the annex and if you search for Saturn, and you will see reference about that paper. It's not in the patent, but in the annex, which is the document I remember showing. Not in this document. This is the patent. You're going through.
Yeah, one of the patents has the annex attached to it. I don't think this one does. This is just the main patent, I think, and the second patent, the
annex itself is 188 pages.
Let's see if I can find it a different way.
Okay, hang on a second. I can give you the title. It's from the USB stick.
Let's see here. Okay, there's let's see here. Lots of beeps and boops coming from you there. Interesting.
That's my computer. Okay, the name of the document is the New Gravitational and Energy System doc, I think. If you can search for that one, and the folder I can also, it's under Keshe, first patents Keshe, Pat 1 patent. That's the folder, the structure.
What was the first words again?
Okay, under the Keshe patents, that's the folder name, all caps, Keshe space patents. Under that, the first folder is first patents Keshe, first patents space Keshe.
Yep.
Okay, and under there are 3 folders. One of them is Pat 1.
Right.
Go to Pat 1, patent, that folder, inside that folder.
Okay, yeah. Got description, is that it?
No, the new gravitational and energy system. Do you see that one? The document.
Oh.
No?
I see. Oh, I think, yes, it's a document there, yes.
Yeah, that's the document I'm talking about.
All right, let me open that up. A little hidden, you might say, but I think it is available otherwise.
188 pages, it's not small.
Yeah, if it was in the on your bookshelf, it would be different. Okay, let me just get this lined up here and everything ship shape. Okay, share. Okay, it should be shared there. I'm trying to make it bigger if somehow it's not wanting to cooperate. Let's try again here. Ah, that's better. Even bigger. No, it's too big. Okay. There we go. All right, you should be able to see it there. I'll get it zeroed in on live stream so folks there can see it better. And we see, of course, the famous reactor picture. That's actually the exact same one that I have on my filing cabinet here, which is interesting. And this picture actually shows the whole mechanism of all the layers of the gases, the fields, the rays that are coming off, the magnetic fields, the interaction of the fields, and the taking off of energy on the outer layers, and the whole thing shown in that one diagram. Amazing. You just have to know what you're looking at. So it gets into, actually mentions right on there too.
Okay, look at the list of things that's mentioned, like the titles of various things at the beginning. You can see the level of detail it goes. The thing, just reading through it is also very enlightening in the sense that it talks about Earth, creation of gravity, human gravity, and then the magnetosphere, the black hole, dark matter.
Right.
And what each of these do is also important, because even if we are not using matter states, gases or things like that, their functions are very important.
Right. Right. Because basically it's a conversion of the fields that's going on in different ways, and that's what the gases are there for. Each of them has their role in the conversion of the principal matter or energy in the core of the reactor, and converting it back to keep that core going at the same time. And the extreme ultraviolet was a big factor involved in that reaction to keep it going. That's the way the reaction undergoes in space, because there's lots of extreme ultraviolet in space, and that's the main currency, you might say, to instigate the reactions. It creates this scintillation, and then it mentions other methods of generating the extreme ultraviolet. That's what EUV is there. Talks about turbulence. I mean, that's essentially what was going on in the bathtub, was about turbulence. Maybe we could read about that and just see what he says. Doesn't have a page number, but all about the hydrogen and ionized gases. And oh, here's a mention of Saturn here.
Yes, it's all over the place, actually.
Oh, okay. He talks about
but one
he
of the
mentions here that the outer core is not necessarily made of metallic iron alloys, which has been assumed up to now.
Yes.
And there's a parallel for this in the cosmophysical observations. We're usually in the vicinity of atomic hydrogen in the cosmic clouds. Sodium and potassium in atomic and molecular structure of these clouds are observed. And I've ran into sodium recently. They were talking about actually sodium hydroxide as being one of the ingredients of these cosmic clouds. I thought, potassium hydroxide, sodium hydroxide, what? Really? Could this be? And then he mentions, even in the case of Saturn, the non-metallic helium is considered to behave like metallic material under such extreme pressures. Therefore, this concept tallies with all the present observations and assumptions.
Essentially, what metallic is in a sense, you can create plasma current through it. And in gas state, it behaves like nanolayer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
So this is the most fascinating part. And with various gases, you essentially create different types of nanolayer with different properties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really amazing to go through this whole material.
Yeah, and how could this still be relevant? Well, how many years this has been now? It came out in, it doesn't even mention here, but I think in is it 2008 or something like that, 2006 perhaps.
The planet Earth has been in existing for 1 million years or billions of years, so it's still relevant. It's really about how the planet operates in the sense of how it maintains heat, its magnetosphere, its gravitation, and its layers of various magnetic fields.
And let's not forget about the Caroline core.
Yes, all of these are in detail. The Caroline core is inside the inner core and how that sustains, and it's like about 8 kilometers in dimension. The inner core is about 60 kilometers, something like that. And how the whole process coordinates with the outer core and the rest, how the inertial matter is formed, which is the Earth's crust, and the relationship of gravity. It's the boundary of the gravitational gravity of the planet, and we are not stuck to the Earth, but we have the option of leaving the Earth. And how, because of this, since we just crossed the boundary, which is the crust, it's really fascinating to go through it. And then there is also talk about how if you change the parameter of these interactions, you get the condition of sun or an entity that radiates light. So anyway, I recommend going through this. It's really fascinating.
Yes, it definitely is. It talks about the different gases here and their functions very explicitly. Like, for example, krypton has to be at least the last gas in any reactor, as argon can never under any circumstances come in touch directly with the body of the inner core. This is being due to the fact that argon is the current carrier in the core. So you don't want that current.
Essentially creating separation just like nanolayers,
Mm-hmm.
separation with material, which is the inner core.
It's all about the gap and the spacing, right? Yep.
Exactly, exactly.
And he goes on to talk about xenon, which I've mentioned. And then he does mention radon here. And I'd like to just say what he says about radon. It's a very short statement. Radon, this is one of the most important inert gases for this type of reactor operation. This gas will carry the element of scintillation of the helium gas. At this stage of patent, this gas will not be used as part of the Caroline core. So that to me indicates that it's used not at the Caroline core, but at the outer core. And it actually helps carry this scintillation of the helium gas. So in other words, the rays from the radon go toward the center and tend to scintillate the helium. The helium activates the hydrogen, and it's, you know, the wrist bones attached to the elbow and the, you know, knee bones attached to the hip bone and all that stuff. And the interconnection of the reactions takes place once it's initiated. But he's careful not to give all of the clues, I think, here, although I think they're all there, but he doesn't always give he doesn't always throw in the ignition key to all of these reactions. Just shows, he lays it out, sets it up, and it's up to us to get it to actually activate, which takes very explicit, very precise conditions for the correct ionization and so on to occur.
What is this word you're using, scintillate? What does this mean?
Okay, well, we can look it up in Wikipedia perhaps, but it's basically the ionization.
I can talk about it a little bit if you want to, because since I've gone through it many times.
Sure, go ahead.
The main thing is that I'll go in the reverse, in the sense that the objective is to ionize the hydrogen to create plasma, which is when you ionize hydrogen, essentially you are separating out the electron, and it's the positive. It's a proton and electron plasma mix. In order to do that, what you need is extreme ultraviolet rays. So the helium, and you scintillate the helium. What that means is that you expose helium to alpha or beta radiation, and which in turn generates extreme ultraviolet rays. And that's what ionizes hydrogen. This is exact, and you want to do it in a controlled fashion to control the degree of ionization, or the degree of the amount of plasma you want to create certain flow. So this is the basic operation that's going on in the inner core of these reactors, is to create hydrogen plasma. And if you think about it, we also create hydrogen GANs, which produces hydrogen plasma. And we don't have to go through these radiation sequence, which Mr. Keshe has talked about, that with GANs, you don't need radiation because you get the plasma from the hydrogen GANs. So this is the main difference between, and you can see the connection between this type of plasma creation versus what we have with the GANs. And many of the principles apply here as well. Does that make sense, or does it?
Yeah, that's basically the way I understand it. I see that there is he does talk about it here. And yes. Scintillation is the most important, and its presence is the fundamental step in the creation of any process in the universe cycle of life. any process in the universe cycle of life, I repeat. Without scintillation in a low density, low volume ration of atomic hydrogen environment of galaxies, the process of ionization will not take place, that the rest of the chain of events for the creation of any system or galaxy can take as initiated. Scintillation is the ignition key. It's underlined. There's very few things in this patent that are underlined. That one is underlined.
Yes.
Ignition key one.
You were talking about the ignition key a moment back.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the start. Number one for the start of creation of any system in the universe.
Hey, Rick, can I ask a question? Hey, how are you guys?
How you doing?
Okay. We're talking about ionization, but if you take the teachings, especially lately of Mr. Keshe, where, well, it goes back for years, where he says, actually in plasma, we don't have protons, neutrons, and electrons. So the process of ionization is a real process, it's a real phenomenon, but can you guys try to analyze it as being a process that exists with your knowledge of it without losing electrons that actually don't exist? There's something else going on. It's a plasmatic interaction, right? Does that make sense?
After it's ignited, yes, but before it's ignited, you have a bunch of matter level stuff.
No, I don't think so, Rick. I think that's the point. It's not matter level. It's
Well, you got a bunch of gases sitting around in a reactor that don't do a damn thing. What's more matter level than that? It doesn't generate the fields. It doesn't generate any power. It doesn't generate lift. It doesn't generate dick all. It's just a bunch of sloppy gases sitting in the bottom of a reactor. Unless you rotate it, then they separate out. But you still have absolutely nothing until you have the ignition key.
Wait a minute. Okay.
And then everything changes into a plasmatic condition. You don't have a true plasma until the scintillation process. That's what he says. It is the most important fundamental step in the creation of any process in the universe cycle of life.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't it possible that the phenomenon he's talking about here is what he talked about really from the beginning, creating a free plasma where the field's going into a portal and scraping out. And basically, Mr. Keshe said, like, think about putting a metal ball against a grinder so that you have this spraying back out into the environment, or drilling a hole in the universe, a splashback that creates the plasma. So it's the field lines interacting that are spraying back into the environment. The difference of the fields going in and out of that portal equals the mass of the plasma. So that's the process he's really talking about here. What I mean when I say it's not, when you talk about matter level, you're assuming or taking an assumption that at one point there's such a thing as protons, neutrons, and electrons, little particles, and then at another point it becomes a plasma. Where Mr. Keshe said, actually, the whole universe is plasma. There is no such thing as protons, neutrons, and electrons. That's a false assumption that goes back only a couple hundred years of a particle-based universe. If we're not talking about what I mean is the ionization process cannot be losing or loss of electrons, because there's no such thing as electrons. The actual elements themselves, those gases, are actually plasmas. Every one of those molecules of gas has its own central core and is radiating. It's just that as a totality, he wants to make one single plasma out of the gases that are in there, with one central Caroline core, which is a portal. And so the whole process is drilling a hole in the universe, so to speak, which is scintillation. right? It's grinding these fields and creating this action where all of the gases behave as a single entity, like a flock of birds, which is what Mr. Keshe described it like. That's, I think, really, instead of just saying, okay, well, we have two different types of physics in the universe. We have one where you have protons, neutrons, and electrons, which you've already figured out. And then another where we have a conversion to plasma. But that's not really Mr. Keshe's teaching. I mean, yes, he uses those terms.
Well,
because
are you saying that the patent is not Mr. Keshe's teaching then? Is that what you're saying?
Is the teaching.
Okay, well, it says right here, right in this teaching, it says right here, in galaxies, the ultraviolet photons from the explosion of stars have sufficient energy to strip the electrons completely away from hydrogen atoms and ionized hydrogen atoms.
Right.
And if the atom of hydrogen absorbs a photon with a wavelength of 912 angstroms, the atom is ionized with the extra energy going into kinetic energy of the electron. Right. And so on. It's very, very specific about the collisions, about the energy, how it works in the reactor, how the hydrogen converts into different materials and converts into the helium and gives off extra energy, and how the fusion occurs. And all of that is stated very exactly, step by step in here. Right. And it uses terms such as electrons and protons and so on to create that plasma. But the core plasma that's in the middle of the reactor is in a different state than the outer parts of the reactor. There's still a physicality reactor there. It doesn't disappear necessarily. It doesn't, evaporate or something. You still have this wall of the reactor containing the plasma inside. And yes, the plasma will be in a different state with all of these ionized gases and so on. It's a flux. It's not just protons, electrons, and so on. You might have the antimatter and dark matter or other stuff that's the principal fields and so on that's involved in the core and the voidness where all of that comes from.
Well, look, no, I think you first of all, Mr. Keshe is speaking in a language that the scientists can understand. So
yes, that's one of the purposes, yes.
So he's using...
So do you want to use language that scientists don't understand? What's your purpose of going away from the scientific language here?
No, I know, but my point is, Mr. Keshe is speaking in a language in this scientific paper based on a matter level understanding of the universe. He's an expert on it because he studied nuclear physics. So he can speak with authority on the matter level interpretation of the universe. But Mr. Keshe has been very clear on this. It's a mirage. It's a false interpretation of the real plasma. It's a plasma, not electrons, protons, and neutrons. In his paper, he's speaking to people who lived in a cave, chained to the cave walls, who need a picture. He's painting wall paintings here. He has to speak to people who don't have any other way to understand it. That's the point of it, is that he has to use that language here. But
of course. So what's your point? This gets through to people that can understand it. If you don't understand it, if you don't care about it, then why even talk about it? It's not relevant to you. It's relevant to me. It's relevant to Moshfek. It's made a huge difference in my life.
No,
well, what is your point, Mario? That it's all plasma. And when you say it's all plasma, that's a cop-out. Because right now you're sitting on a couch or a chair or something. Is that all plasma? Is everything all plasma around you all the time? You have no matter level in your life.
No, it's not. Matter level is just the bandwidth that we interact with. Nothing more. It's like...
I agree. And this is the way that, a way that you can interact with the matter level to get to the plasma level. It tells you how to put together a reactor to create the plasma and how it's done in space.
Well, it's done in your body at the central core.
How it's done in your body. That's shown in here too. It's all described in the patent.
But the language here is matter level language, understanding, interpretation. Not that
well, he doesn't talk just about matter level. He talks about, if you go into the first of the patent, he gets into heavily into.
No, Rick, all I'm saying is you can look at this, what he's explaining there, and if you take in the rest of the other teachings, like the Seventh Health Workshop about elements and about and many of the other teachings, especially in the past month, that it's that you can take what he's talking about here and reanalyze it as a plasma interaction, and it'll
sure.
Right.
Sure, you can. Yes, you can. Definitely.
We should be doing that.
Have you created anything yet from that?
From what?
From that exercise in looking at all of this from a plasmatic point of view? Have you created anything that actually works using that idea?
Well, yes, I showed.
Okay, so you've created heat, energy, magnetism, and gravity from your work, correct? That's what this system is for. The development of this system for the creation of heat and energy, magnetism, and gravity is one of the prime objectives of this design.
Yeah, actually, Rick, I've done it.
This is not.
I've done it lots of times.
All right, then you can show us how to create heat and energy and magnetism and gravity with your devices.
All of the reactors, every one. As soon as you get a free plasma, even before you have a free plasma, you have heat, energy, magnetism, and gravity. You have those. They're there. I don't know what else you can have. That's what.
So you don't need to create it then. Is that what you're saying? It's not a system for the creation of it. It's already there. So you don't have to create anything. So there's nothing to be done. End of story.
Well, Rick.
End of creation, end of design. The design is not relevant because everything is already there in your system,
actually, Rick,
correct?
If you let me, it is already here. What do you think you're living in? What do you think is happening in the environment everywhere around you? You have heat, energy, magnetism, and gravity. This is replicating that. We replicate the universe.
Yes, that's right. This is a system to replicate the way it's done in the universe.
That's all you're doing is replicating what's already there. But it's not electrons, protons, and neutrons. So ionization is something else, really. This is Mr. Keshe talking about it in a scientific matter level interpretation, which is not correct. I mean, this is correct. The teaching is correct here. But
you gotta clarify in yourself what is correct and incorrect. You just said it's incorrect, and then you corrected yourself that it's correct, but it's not correct.
No, Rick.
Okay, well, either it is or it isn't. Either it's applicable to somebody getting to the next level in their understanding, or it isn't.
Well, applicable to people getting to the next level of understanding, perhaps. Yes, of course it is. The point is,
that's all we can expect from anything, because everything is temporary. All of your understanding is temporary according to our current understanding. And to say that it's all plasma or whatever is fine. That's a current understanding. That'll change as well. It'll be, some other different explanation later or whatever.
No, Rick, it's all a plasma. It's a fractal universe. It's plasma at every level.
Totally agree. It's all magnetic fields. It's all illusion. Right. Totally illusion.
So then what is this process here analyzed not with electrons and protons, with this interpretation, using this language? How can we explain the process the other, like what we've been doing? The only single subject really that has been reanalyzed from matter level interpretation to plasma is the health. And that's because of Dr. Elia. She brought in health, the matter level interpretation, and then Mr. Keshe went in there and talked about the plasma interpretation. The human body is a galaxy. Every cell is a solar system. Every cell's got a central core. Every cell, every atom is not an atom with electrons, protons, and neutrons. It's a plasma, a bunch of plasmas getting together, creating a central core of a single plasma made up of those plasmas. What is called scintillation here and what is called ionization, if you just continue to just say, okay, well, it's a matter level, so therefore we can use the old interpretation of matter level with electrons, protons, and neutrons, and that's satisfying enough. We don't need to understand it at any higher level as a plasma. I think it's short-sighted. I think we need to
well, of course, but you got to start with something. You got to start somewhere in order to create an actual reactor that actually has some real physical effects, not just, you know,
but they all have been
subtle things that you can feel the fields and so on. We're not talking about feeling the fields here. We're talking about creating heat, energy, magnetism, and gravity in unlimited condition.
Reactor, Rick, has been doing that all along.
Well, I don't see anything lifting off. I don't see anyone heating their home. I don't see anyone creating enough energy to power anything more than half an LED. And I don't see extreme magnetism other than what Mr. Keshe showed at the 129 Tesla. No one else has showed that.
Sorry, hold on a second, Rick. Where does it say extreme in there? I don't see.
If you look at what he's talking about a system to create the main core of the lift, gravity, and all of the parts.
That's the free plasma. That's the soul of the entity, to create life. You don't create the life, you create a condition where life is born. That's scintillation. Sure. That's what it's about. All of this is about that. The essence of creation, not electrons.
I never said it's about electrons. That's just part of what he describes in here about how the actual effect of scintillation happens in the universe.
Right, but he's using the language of the matter.
He's using his language, darn it. He's using his language. It's his patent. He can use any words he wants to. He uses the same language in the books as well.
Yes, but no, he cannot use any language he wants. He has to.
No, he's used this language. It's in there. It's down in black and white. It's the main core of the USB key that he gives to all the governments of the world.
That's
this
right.
Is not just, it's not just passé now. It's not obsolete now. It's not something we shouldn't look at because it uses the word, you know, proton or whatever. He still uses the word proton, electron.
Yes, because he's still talking to people who don't believe that there's no such thing as protons, neutrons, and electrons.
Yes, everything's illusion. So why would we even talk about any of this if it's all illusion?
No, not all. Everything's an illusion, but
everything is an illusion. All phenomena is an illusion.
I didn't say illusion.
That's what I'm saying. All phenomena is an illusion.
Well, but that's not
Mr. Keshe. Looks like something. It's an illusion. That's my teaching right now.
Mr. Keshe's teaching is that it's a mirage. There's a difference between.
Well, he didn't. I don't recall him saying a mirage, but I recall him saying illusion.
No, it's a mirage is the word.
Well, whatever. Mirage, illusion.
No, a mirage and illusion are two different things. Look, you're on the desert. You see what an optical illusion on the horizon. If you interpret that as being a body of water, liquid water, you can go fill your canteen because you're dying of thirst. You go chasing after that optical illusion. That false interpretation makes it a mirage. Because but look at the other way around. If you look at that optical illusion and say, oh, that's an optical illusion, that is not really a body of liquid water. I'm not going to chase that off to my death, right? Which countless people have done over the years, over the millennia, has chased a mirage, has chased an optical illusion. Why? Because they misinterpret it. It's the interpretation of it that makes it a mirage. An optical illusion is an optical illusion. If you recognize
we could apply that same principle to every item that you see in the entire universe around you is an illusion. An illusion. If you see it as a physical item. If you see this as a physical item,
you correctly interpret
an illusion. You're seeing an illusion. It's not a physical item. It is a bunch of magnetic fields. Hello.
Let me speak a second.
So this is a bunch of magnetic fields. This is a bunch of magnetic fields. I am a bunch of magnetic fields. If you see a person here, you are under an illusion because I am actually a makeup of magnetic fields, and I can prove it. Actually, you were to take a microscope and look closely at me and look into my cells and look beyond the cells to the atomic level, and beyond that, all of a sudden it becomes a voidness. And there's maybe a something over there, a magnetic field over there, and a magnetic field over there, and it's voidness with a bunch of magnetic fields. That's it.
No, that's not correct. That's not
well, okay, that's my interpretation. But you can say I'm not correct if you want.
No,
Rick, my interpretation of life is incorrect if you want.
No, but look,
you have the only correct way, Mario. You keep saying that everybody's incorrect, and we have an incorrect way of looking at things, and that this patent is incorrect.
No, the patent is not incorrect.
Well, you did say that at one point until you corrected yourself. No, I did not say that.
You
said it's incorrect to talk about protons and electrons in this.
No, I did not say that. You're just making a straw man argument and putting words in my mouth, and then. Look, the phenomenon you see in the desert, it's a real phenomenon. It's a real phenomenon. Your interpretation of it, you see what looks like a body of water, that's what your eyes are seeing. But if you recognize it as a real phenomenon for what it really is, a beautiful thing.
What is a real phenomenon? There's nothing that's real if everything is made up of little magnetic fields. There's nothing solid in the universe.
No, what's solidity?
Right, exactly. It's all an illusion. The 3D vision that we have is an illusion. It's light reflected off of magnetic fields. All of this stuff is just simply light reflected off of magnetic fields. There is no anything. There's no particles to it. You're right. There are no particles.
True, Rick.
It is true. It is true. There are no particles when you look. Look at any of the particles that make up these glasses. If you look at it close enough, it disappears. There are no particles left.
No, there's no particles. There's Coulomb barriers.
Well, there we agree.
There's Coulomb barriers that some you can pass, some you cannot, some you can see, hear, smell, taste, and feel, some you cannot. That's just the way it goes. There's radio stations passing right through right now, music playing. Does that mean because you don't have a radio tuned to it that it's not there? Of course it's there. It's a real phenomenon. We need to start.
It's a phenomenon, but it's not real because you're hearing it through a bunch of interpretation through the ears and so on. It's a totally illusion. What do you mean real? What do you mean by real?
It's a real phenomenon.
All phenomena is illusion. That's what I'm putting forward now, because you want to get into the true nature of life as it really is, then we'll get into it. You don't want to talk about the matter level. We won't talk about the pattern. We'll get into the way it really is. All phenomena is illusion. That's what I'm putting forward. There is nothing that you can say against that. Name one phenomena that's not illusion. Name one. Name one sense that you have that's direct and has absolutely no interpretation in between. There is none. It's all has illusion.
Well, I know what depends on what you call an illusion.
I call an illusion all phenomena. A phenomena, something that appears real to us.
But there's an illusion of a blue color and there's an illusion of a red color.
Doesn't matter. It's all illusion. All phenomena is illusion. That is
so then there's no difference between red and blue.
That is the key to seeing the universe in terms of fields and plasma rather than matter level stuff. Because if we were able to see all of this stuff in its true nature, we would see it or feel it as fields, not as what looks to be a matter level substance, because we wouldn't be able to see it, because we wouldn't see the reflected light off the magnetic fields, because we know that that's illusion, and we would have that knowledge of being able to see directly. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, but it's about knowledge of it. The more you understand.
Knowledge of it gives you nothing. You have to experience it in the moment. Otherwise, it's all BS. It's all talking about something, and that is illusion. If you don't experience it in the moment, then it's all a bunch of talking about the illusion and reframing the illusion and certifying the illusion and making sure everybody else believes your illusion and all of the illusion stuff that we deal with on this planet. It is all basically illusion. All the phenomena, the things that we interpret with our senses are phenomena, are misinterpreted because we cannot possibly be in the moment because we are using our senses, which are always once removed. Every single one. The nose is the closest one we have to our brain. All the other senses go through more stuff to be able to interpret it. So the nose is the quickest, nanoseconds to get to the brain and to register things. All the other senses, the hearing, the sight, it goes through this process, and the nerves have to, snap, and all this stuff has to happen. So there's as much as not just nano, but microseconds, or even thousandths of a second or hundredths of a second become important. Like we can't register anything that goes more than 120 blips per second, and it looks all smeared together for us. So we think everything moves smoothly when it's actually more like a movie screen, piece by piece, picture by picture. And that's part of the different interpretation that occurs if one is to engage into that all phenomena is illusion, and seeing the true nature of the voidness of the void. That's what it's all about on that level. And you no longer see the matter level necessarily. It becomes all about the fields. And the matter level becomes more or less transparent, and you're not able to see that level. It's different, it's just not relevant anymore.
Yeah, okay. What you just said there, I don't have any problem with that.
Okay, but to operate from that perspective and actually try to build something on the matter level is pretty tricky, because then you have to start interacting with the matter level, and that gets into
there's another way. But
working with illusion, why would you want to even participate in the illusion?
Well, but look, what you're calling the matter level is just the bandwidth that your eyes are tuned to. So you're seeing, it's not you just seeing something that's not there, you're seeing something that's there, but you're only seeing a little slice of what's actually there. You're not seeing all of it. You're only seeing that part of it. Same thing with your hearing, same thing with smell, same thing with everything. You only can hear, smell, taste, feel, or touch something that you're within your bandwidth, that you're tuned to. And as far as what makes something solid or liquid, it's the relative rotation of the fields relative to you. If a glass of water has molecules in it that are more or less in tune with the same speed rotation of the molecules in your body, we call it room temperature, or 98.6 or whatever it is centigrade, then it's a liquid. But if the environment changes and that water slows down those molecules relative to your molecules in your body, then it behaves as solid to us. But to another entity whose fields are in tune with that slower level, he can swim through what looks like a block of ice to us, because that's the rotation speed. It's relative. It's relative. There's no such thing as a solid or a liquid or a gas. It depends on from your perspective.
Is there such a thing as molecules then? You say there's no such thing as protons and electrons, but there's molecules?
Yeah, of course there's molecules, and there's what we call atoms, but they're plasmas. They're not made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. They're little things like you made in the bathroom.
Why would you call them molecules when you could be just calling them plasmas then?
Well, why not? I mean, because there's a difference. Because at one level,
this is the problem. As soon as you start to discern the difference,
I can tell you the answer.
Okay, go ahead.
But let me answer. You have mass sizes of what we call atomic level. what Mr. Keshe calls atomic level. Those are plasmas. They have central cores. They're actually made up, they have layers and crossings of fields and have little, they're a neutron that is divided into a proton and electrons. The proton is the whole plasma, and the electrons are all the little places where the field lines cross. They all have their own souls. It's a body. It's a galaxy. And then you have when multiple atom-sized plasmas come together and they become a flock of plasmas, like a flock of birds. They create a single plasma that behaves as a single entity with multiple plasmas within it. It's fractal. So you look at the whole molecule, it's one plasma. But you zoom in, you see, oh, it's made up, it's a galaxy. It's got all those molecules that are in it, plus each molecule has got the atoms that are in it, and each atom has got all the little mini plasmas that are made. It's fractal. It's fractal. So you have a flock of molecules becomes a human body or an amino acid. And then you have flocks of amino acids. And every time they join, they do this. They create a central core that's scintillating. It's scraping against the universe. The actual plasma is the result of the fields scraping against each other as they're going in and out of that central core, that portal. That's what's going on. It's all a plasma, but each plasma has its own energy signature based on its parents. Yeah. In other words, the nitrogen that's created at a layer of the Earth that is due to the interaction of the fields of the Earth and the sun at that position. So there's a pulse rate of each and a mass of each. They can be massive fields, but if they're almost exactly the same, what's scraping off of them is a really tiny little bit of mass. And its heartbeat rates are going to be equal to the difference of the heartbeat rates of the two going in. So you have an energy package of plasmas that are scraping off and creating a plasma we call nitrogen. It's raining down on the environment, right? As an energy, like a note ringing in the atmosphere. It literally is a note, and it literally is light. It's probably the blue color of our atmosphere is the nitrogen, most likely. I'm not sure about that. But the point is, it's color, it's heat, it's magnetism, it's all of those things. It's got a central core, it's got a soul, and as an amino acid, that's one plasma made up of those four plasmas with its own central core. So now you have a flock of elements that are one amino acid. That's got its own soul. And then you have multiple amino acids that combine with calcium and the phosphorus and the iron and the others, and they become a flock of plasmas that has a central core soul that we call the soul of the man. No different. It's all the same, whether it's a galaxy or whether it's a human body, right? So and they all have their own mass. They all have their own energy signature. The layers of a nitrogen, it will have 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, 6 to 1, 7 to 1 layers with a possible infinite number of layers within the structure of the nitrogen. But there's gaps. There's what we were talking about, the space gaps in the layers. There'll be the second layer has no amplitude. So it's white noise relatively to us. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just there in the background, but it doesn't have a layer in the nitrogen. So the nitrogen itself has its own energy signature, unique to it. And then when it interacts with the oxygen has its own, it's got the same ratios, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, but there are gaps. And the layers that link from the oxygen to the nitrogen create the hydrogen. You have a third entity and the carbon. So you get an amino acid, and it has its own energy signature on the Earth, but it's the ratios 1 to 12 to 14 to 16. Those are energy levels. That's the only real difference, that and which gaps in the layers there are. See, it's not that
Yeah, that makes sense, but it all depends on one's perspective on what level you're observing at.
Yes, now you see. Right, it's relative. You can only measure the differential. You cannot measure the actual entity. Plus, your interaction, when you look at a painting on the wall, you see reds and the greens and the blues and all that, but those are only the colors that of that painting that you are interacting with. Those are the ones that your eyes can actually see. And what happens is your eyes are radiating energy, and that's interacting with the painting on the wall. And so what happens is you get a feedback loop. And so what you're actually seeing is not the painting, not even the canvas. You're seeing the difference between your fields that you're generating and the fields that you're interacting with that are being amplified, that are getting
right.
pulled.
It's essentially the leftovers, not the actual.
Actually, that's exactly right.
In that sense, that's what I mean. All phenomena is illusion. It's all the leftovers from the fields. It's not the actual fields themselves that we normally see.
But there are measurable differences. Now, you can't measure the actual energy level even. You don't even know, we can't even know what's the frequency of that. We can only tell what's the difference of our frequency and its frequency. Now, if you know your frequency, then you can know its frequency. But how can you know your frequency? Because you can only measure your frequency as a difference from your interaction with other entities' frequencies, right? So you can't, it's only relative measurements, intervals. You can measure it as 2 to 1, 8 to 1, 16 to 3, 42 to 6, whatever, but you cannot measure the actual frequency. So you're right. It's an illusion. If the way you want to call it illusion, that's perfectly fine, but they are measurable. There are differences between red and blue. Now, what I see in my mind as red may not be the same thing that you see as red, but both our eyes will agree that the differential frequency is red. Actually, the color red is...
But what would a hummingbird say? It might say, oh, I don't see red or blue, but I do see that ultraviolet. Oh, yeah, that's the one I go for every time.
Because the hummingbird's eyes can only see what it can interact with. It can only see what it interacts with. It can...
Right. So that's, again, another proof that all phenomena is illusion, depending on your perspective and a subjective viewpoint.
But it's measurable. And the humans have measured it.
Well,
the element numbers are their energy levels. That's their heartbeat rates. That's all that is. And it's not that it's not correct. In that sense, it's what Mr. Keshe said. It's based on counting numbers of protons, neutrons, and electrons, which we don't have. So if we get away from looking at it as numbers of protons, neutrons, and electrons, and we realize these are energy packages that not only do they have a heartbeat rate at the fundamental level, the outer level, but they have a series of layers, and there's gaps in those layers. We can look at Fourier spectral analysis of the elements and see the gaps and see the energy signatures. But again, even then, you're not actually seeing the energy signature itself. If you use infrared for your spectral analysis, what you're actually going to get is the difference between the infrared and whatever element you're measuring. So
exactly.
But you can...
Again, it gets back to my point of what is really real.
Yeah, but we do need to know how to measure them in that way. That's something. We can't just say, well, it's all an illusion, so therefore we don't have to bother measuring.
That's the thing about calling everything plasma, is that getting into the realm of saying all phenomena is illusion, which is...
No, well, yes, but except that if you look at it as a plasma, every single plasma has its own energy signature based on which layers are interacting and which are not. And so therefore it is a real phenomenon. It's not that it doesn't exist. The painting on the wall does exist. It just doesn't exist only as the way you see it. If you change your eye frequencies, or use an infrared camera, you'll see a completely different picture. Yeah, or it'll look different anyway, maybe not completely different.
Well, if it doesn't come to your attention, you might not see it at all. You know,
that's right.
Essentially doesn't exist until someone puts attention on it.
Well, or it does exist, but not to you. To somebody else, they're saying, hey, look at that green. You say, what green? I don't see green. To them, it's green. To us, nothing. Because it's relative. It's like the glass of water. What's solid, liquid, or gas? To whom? Right? Like the ring magnet. To, you know, we say a ring magnet. Our skin can reposition that magnet at this layer. So I can take my finger and move that magnet over there. But to another magnet, its skin touches the skin of the other magnet way out there where we don't see or feel or hear or smell or taste anything. Does that mean it's not there because we didn't see it? No, because another magnet, its skin can reposition that magnet. It's a skin to skin interaction. Literally, they have to be touching, because if you move the one magnet away so that its skin at that outer level is not, it won't move the magnet. If it move it in, its skin touches it way out there. So when you say, well, what's the field strength of the iron magnet? You have to say, well, to whom? To you, it's that iron ball ring that you see there. But to another iron magnet, it's way out there. That's a much lower field strength. So what's the field strength of an iron magnet? To whom? Right? So it's not like everything's an optical illusion and so therefore nothing exists. It does exist, but to whom? Right? I mean, right in your room right now, there are images, sounds, people talking, singing, playing, and all kinds of things going on, sports and all that. If you have a tuner, if you could tune your eyes and your ears the way you could tune a radio tuner, you could listen to the ball game without a radio, couldn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yep, some people do with their teeth systems and so on.
Fillings in the teeth have happened where people get a filling and all of a sudden they're hearing a radio station.
Yep, the body's a perfect antenna, so it just requires a few other structures, a bit of nano in there, and bingo.
Yeah, in other words, it's what you're tuned to is what you can interact with. That's what we call the matter level. And why things are solid, liquid, or gas to us is not necessarily solid, liquid, or gas. They're not absolutes. They're relative, right? If you take, I saw this explaining this. You take a household fan with the grid off. You just have the blades of the fan exposed. The fan is not on. It's not turned on. So you can throw a ball right through it, stick your finger right through the gaps, no problem. But if you turn the fan on, then the fans are spinning so fast that no matter when you throw the ball, it always interacts with one of the fan blades and comes bouncing back. That's it. That's a coolant barrier. That's all that's happening. That's the only reason you can't put your finger through the desk or you can sit down or on the floor or whatever, because those fields you cannot pass. To you.
Well, that's what we're taught to believe. There might be possible to actually do that, though. I've actually been part of an experiment with a group that did that one time in Northern California. And
well, just look at the fan thing.
With specific instructions, we were told to put our hand down through the table, not onto the table, but through the table.
Well, sure.
And some people claim to be able to accomplish that, and some obviously didn't.
Well, that's the whole point of Mr. Keshe's teaching. He said the games that the children will play when they understand the plasma, the reason I cannot put my hand through the table or through a block of ice is because my fields are too fast for the ice, the rotation of the fields in that glass of water. If I could speed up the water, then I could put my finger through it. Or conversely, if I could slow down my fields of my finger relative to it, then to you, you're sitting there at your speed. To you, it's still a block of ice, but I'm running my finger through it and it's splashing around and all the rest of it. See, in other words, you can do it two ways. I can manipulate it or I can manipulate me. That's the whole point of this. I think Mr. teaching is that once we realize that we are controlling the rotation of the speed, we are controlling the frequencies our eyes are seeing. Our soul is actually controlling that at every second of every day. So really, once we really grasp that and start thinking and understanding that, then what is color blue? It's just a frequency relative to us of a color, of a plasma interaction. So if I change the color, if I change the rotation of my eyes, I should be able to change the color of my eyes, right? It's just a frequency, nothing more. So that's the whole point of Mr. Keshe's teaching, is to get away from the interpretation. This language is causing a lot of problems. And this is what Mr. Keshe is saying. Not that Mr. Keshe is using their language. This is not Mr. Keshe's language. The real language of Mr. Keshe is in the kids' workshops. None of this jargon. None of this jargon. Right? That's the real Keshe language. This jargon.
True, but
Yeah, but he has to speak in a language people understand. This is a scientific paper that was published for peer review. So he cannot talk in terms of things that they refuse to accept. Not that they don't they don't believe it. It's not that they don't understand it, they don't believe it. They don't believe that their whole background and their PhDs is based on a wrong assumption of matter particles, which is what this is. Using that language. But if you look at all of these patents, the core of it all, if I can use this as a pun, is the Caroline core. All of the reactors, the whole point of it is to open a central core. It's to drill a hole in the universe. That's what all of these reactors are about, is replicating that process of life, creation. Once you have that, you have everything. And creating heat, your body's doing it right now. It's generating heat, it's magnetism, it's all of those things. They're everywhere. Every single reactor generates heat. If we realize that it's because of the rotation of the fields, it's not hot enough. Well, speed up the rotation, right? People are saying, oh, it's not hot. How do I make it hot? What is heat? It's just a relative rotation speed to us. So people are trying to do something, but they think they're trying to do something else. It makes it a lot harder to do that. That's all. Anyway.
Well, you got some good points, and I enjoyed the vigorous interaction here. It just gets hard to manage when everything becomes plasma and everything becomes without differences in a way, and it becomes blended together, because in that realm, it is all one soul. It's one being. There is no differences. There might be separateness, but it's all one soul. All of these souls you talk about are part of the one soul.
Yes, but the soul
becomes one soul. It's not billions and billions and billions of souls.
No, it is billions and billions of billions.
No, it's one soul. Soul is soul, period.
But no, Rick, that is not the teachings. The one soul of the creator has divided and has replicated itself.
And it's exactly the same in each replication. It is one soul. You think your soul's different than my soul and is different than all these different beings of planet Earth are all separate individuals.
Not separate, but different. Same, but different. In other words,
are they one soul? The difference is in the physicality. Is the soul the same?
No. The difference is in the RNA, is in the memory. It's in the energy signature. Your energy signature is created not just due to the interaction of your parents, they're also due to the interaction of everything in the environment, and every experience you ever had is all stored in your RNA. That makes you unique. So the creator has done something better than just copy itself. It's created individuals. See, that's the miracle of creation. It's the same thing, but different. Every single entity is its own soul, its own creator. It's creating its own universe. You have every cell in your body is part of you. Every cell in your body has a soul. They've all agreed, like a flock of birds. The flock of birds, the scientists say, oh, that bird is the lead bird in the flock. No, the actual lead bird is not a bird at all. It's a central core that has what we would not see, but the birds feel it. They know it's there. And so there's a single entity controlling the entire flock that have all agreed to be a part of a body. They've agreed to do it, and they're all acting as a single entity. In turn, that soul is looking for food and guiding the whole flock or whatever for the purposes of the benefit of the flock, right? So the soul is feeding the birds, and the birds are feeding the soul, same as your body. Every soul in their body is feeding back to the soul of the man. And it's their existence that creates the entity of the soul of the man. And it's the soul of the man that's divided, that's created this connected body of the man. So again, it's the yin yang. You have both. You have the physicality is creating the soul of the man, and the soul of the man is creating the physical. But the physicality, again, is nothing but Coulomb barriers at certain field strengths, like everything. Your heart's got a skin. Your outer body's got a skin. You've got an atmosphere that's got a skin, and so on, and no different. So, your heart is not the same as your lungs because, it's like a flock of birds, some geese and some ducks and some whatever, that are all behaving as a single entity. That's all. So, but to just say, well, it's all a plasma, so therefore there's no difference between any of the ducks. Well, that's a goose. So it's a soul, it's a plasma. Yeah, and it's made up of flocks of amino acids. So is it exactly the same? Well, same, but different, right? That's the thing,
I think it depends on the perspective, because again, if you were to see the soul of the earth, you might not see all these individual souls. You might see them all as part of one soul.
Well, sure. I mean, it's what you want to look at.
The big fallacy for humans is to think that we're individuals, because we're not. We're all one soul.
Well, look, yes, like the flock of birds, but the flock of birds is made up of a bunch of individual birds.
Do they think of themselves as individuals when they're flying in the flock?
Well, yes,
I thought you said they're aware of the central core that exists, the
right.
Soul, the essence.
So they're individuals.
Can it be both?
Well, they're individual souls that have agreed to cooperate, which is what humans don't do. So you're right. We do need to connect and create a flock of humans that all behave as a central soul of the humans on this planet.
No, that's not my point at all. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we are already connected. The connection is already made if we were just simply to see that level. That's all.
Well, that's true. That's true. But that doesn't mean we're not individuals as well. Just like every cell in your body is an individual
Well,
cell.
That's like saying that there's such a thing as a proton and electron, and you start dividing and dividing and dividing. It's either you see the complete picture from the perspective of the creator as one soul, or you don't. It's pretty simple.
Well, yes, and that's I agree with that totally, Rick, except that, perspective. That's exactly right. I mean, we are part of one body, but you're not the toe, you're the heart, or you're a cell in the liver. So you're doing a different function. Doesn't mean you're not part of that same body. It just means that you're not exactly the same. I mean,
when we talk about our body, do we always exclude our left toe because we think that it's different somehow than the rest of my body? When I say my body, I usually include all the parts of my body, and I don't necessarily, unless I focus on something. Oh, I have a bad tooth, and I separate that tooth from the rest of my body somehow. It becomes, an issue or whatever. It becomes discerned as something separate that I need to focus on within this body. Otherwise, I usually conceive of myself as this body, let's say.
Yeah, but Rick, if you have a toothache.
In that sense, from the absolute's point of view, it's all of our bodies are like cells, and it doesn't see one cell. Do you actually look at all the cells in your body individually and think, oh my God, that cell just died. Oh, I feel so sorry for that poor cell. Oh, look, one just got created. What a wonderful the thing of
well, that's actually what's happening at a certain level. But Rick, if you have a toothache, you don't get your toe removed, Why? Because the toe is over there and has its function, and your tooth is over here and has its function, and it's got a problem. And even when you have that tooth pulled, every cell in that tooth is still connected to your body. It gets thrown into the garbage and goes to the dump. It's still connected. So yeah, there's connections. No question. Absolutely. They stretch forever. They're flexible. So yes, and we are part of one single, but you can't just say, well, then there's nothing to analyze. There's nothing to understand. There's nothing to measure, because you have a toe down there and you have a tooth up here, and they're actually plasmas of different field strengths and different configurations with different energy signatures. For
wait a minute. You're saying the soul has a toe and the soul has fingers and all of this stuff, the physicality?
Strangely enough, it was only a couple of months ago, Mr. Keshe finally answered that question. Yeah, the soul of the man looks like the human, the physicality is in the shape of the physicality. And it's an octave, it's a replica. Yeah, Mr. Keshe actually said that. That surprised the heck out of me. I did not see that coming. But yeah, that's what Mr. Keshe said. The physicality is an image of the soul of the man, right? The soul of the man is the creator. I made man in my own image. Of the rib, it's the soul is the atom, and a part of that is the physicality. Not the entire plasma of the soul, just the part that's manifesting on this side of the portal, if you will, right? That's the physicality. And so, yeah, actually, yeah, for every single part of the body, there's a replica at the soul of the man.
Then how is it that the body is the leech of the soul of the man?
Well, that's because of the sausage, and we've been stealing.
Who's the we you're talking about, first of all? Physicality or the soul? You're saying the soul stealing or the body stealing?
Well, I think now you're asking questions that Mr. Keshe, I have not totally understood from Mr. Keshe's teaching. I'm sure it's there that I don't know. So I have to speculate, but I would say that just generally speaking, when Mr. Keshe told me to go study the Bahula's teachings, the 7 valleys and the 4 valleys, and then later the hidden words, and that the Eve is a harlot.
Sorry, the Eve, the Adam and Eve, you mean?
Mm-hmm. Said, the Adam and Eve is the
harlot? Is that what you're saying?
No, the Adam represents the soul of the man, and the Eve comes from the rib of the soul of the man, which is the physicality. Okay, so you have Adam and Eve. And the Eve has been acting like a harlot, chasing after false gods out there. That's the problem, I think. I mean, that's what Mr. Keshe said. What that means, I guess. What else? Right? We've been chasing after false gods. We're looking out there.
That's why I say the world is a world of illusion, and that all phenomena is illusion, and that's what we normally fall into is a modus operandi as humans.
Well, as long as you differentiate
every single human from this day, from when you wake up in the morning to when you go to sleep at night, is basically under the illusion of the matter level physicality stuff.
Well, yes, but as long as you recognize that there's differentials between those illusions, they are real. We really do manifest in this environment. We are real. The light and the sun and the moon and the stars, they're there. They're real. Do they look the way we see them? Well, to us, they do. Do they have other ways of other entities see other things? Yes. So it's an illusion in that we can only see a tiny spectrum of what they really are, just like we're falsely seeing ourselves. We are plasmas manifesting in this environment, and we have our own energy signatures, and we're different. We're the same. 99.99% of our so-called DNA is the same. Yet you and I are not the same people. Yet we have
over 99% of our DNA is the same as a rat, I think, or something like that. It's ridiculous.
Right. That's right. Well, because we're all plasmas, and they don't understand that. But there is a difference. There is a difference.
Well, I agree. I mean, obviously, we seem to have various differences, and we celebrate them so much as humans. We Actually, that's our whole marketing program, is to give people the differences, all the different clothes to make them individuals, all the hairstyles to make them individuals, all the bodybuilding and other skill building to make them individuals, self-supporting, self-sufficient, self-motivated individuals.
Right.
And nothing of that has anything to do with the soul.
No, but it does, Rick, because what's happening is it's a harlot is chasing after.
Yeah, it's an illusion that has got our attention. And
Well,
instead of putting the attention on where it should be with the soul, it's stuck with the physicality, rooted in the physicality.
But the irony of it is that you are different. You don't need to put on different clothes and different this and different that and all these other things. You already are.
You claim I'm different. I claim I'm the same as everyone else.
No, but you have.
I claim I'm the same entity, the same being as every other entity on this planet. The same inner core being soul, same soul, one soul only, not multiple souls all over the place. That is the illusion. That is the illusion that we see because we get stuck in our physicality world. Oh, that soul is different than this soul. But if you look into the eyes of that entity and really sit there with them for a period of time, usually takes 5 or 10 minutes, and just look directly into the eyes and receive that being's energy and your own energy mixing, you'll find, if you do it properly, that it is one being that you see through those eyes, not two. And it becomes one being. And you understand through that experience, if you have that experience of experiencing directly another soul, that it is the one being. It's the same soul. It's not a different soul. It's the same soul. Now, it may have different flavors, but it's all ice cream. It's all the soul, and it's completely different world than the physicality, and all of the aspirations and all of the skills of the physicality are totally left behind in that world of simple presence that occurs with the soul.
Well, that's the division of the neutron, Rick. That's the point.
Well, that's the point. You can look at the perspective of the neutron, or you can look at the perspective of division, dividing everything, divide and conquer. And
no,
this
not
is
divide and conquer. Divide.
This is the way of the humans.
But that's humans' harlot.
That's right. That is the scam, basically. We've been deluded. We've been scammed. We've been made to believe the illusion, but we don't have to.
That's not the norm of the universe, Rick. The norm of the universe is not that the strong steal from the weak. The norm of the universe is that the strong feed the weak. So there is differences. There's differentials. That's all. It doesn't mean that one is better than the other. The difference are beautiful. That's the beauty.
That's my main point. There is no better. It is one being.
Right.
There's no difference. It's one being. But as soon as you start to say there's differences, then I'll take exception, because you're starting to go down the slippery slope of saying that, okay, yes, it's all one being, all one God, but there's many gods, actually. You're God and he's God, and I'm God and you're God. And everybody's a God. Okay,
that's right.
And they're all separate gods.
No, they're not separate gods.
All separate gods. Okay, no, then it's one God. Make up your mind. Make up. You can't have it both ways.
No, but you
can't look at it one way or another, either from the point of view of the physicality or the point of view of the soul. Take your choice.
Okay, but look at it this way. You have a white light. A white light you can reflect it. It's an octave. It's a reflection. It's a replica. So it's white. But if you refract that, you can see that it's made up of divisions. And blue and red and the 7 colors of the rainbow, or whatever you want to call them, exist as part of the white. So It's just adding beauty. It's the creator's way of saying everything is light. Let there be light.
Yes, but you forgot about the clear light, which came before the white light and all the colored light.
But my point is the creator didn't just create light. He gave color. That's character. And it's the same thing with what we call the 7 musical tones. They're all the same. But how much music can you make? In an infinite number of melodic and harmonic entities can manifest out of a simple several octaves on a piano. They're all the same. They have the same energy signature. The only difference is one of them's beating faster than another one. How much music? That's the harmony of the existence. To deny that, to just say, well, it's all white light and any division of it is bad is not, I don't think is correct. I
never said anything about bad. That's the whole thing.
No, but I mean,
I'm saying there's 2 different perspectives as humans that we can attain on this planet. There's one is from the perspective of the physicality, which we normally take and is all part of our programming on this planet and every aspect.
Yeah.
Or we can have the point of view of the soul as simple presence, being present in the moment, without any of the distractions and attractions, repulsions, various visions we see, and all of the distractions that we normally get into. I mean, I've got a billion distractions in this room, thousands of objects that are just screaming for my attention. It drives me crazy. I wish sometimes I want to take everything and put it in a big dumpster or something, start totally clean the way this place was originally, because that everything is taking our attention away from where it could be going inward to our soul rather than outward onto everything.
Right. But if you're going to have to give up the idea that there's beauty in the diversity, not advantage to take advantage of, to steal the way the physicality does. So if what you're saying, I agree with totally, but then you have to also include the fact that you do have these color variations. It's not good or bad. It's not, the basses aren't better than the piccolo. The piccolo, one piccolo's energy can blast your eardrum out where you can have 60 basses and it won't do the same thing. Does that mean I'd rather have a bass in my orchestra if I can have a choice than the piccolo? Because the basses to me are more important. But it's my personal opinion, but not necessarily, it's not good or bad. There is a differential. And to recognize the differential and understand we can measure these things in a very simple way. And this language in these patents and in the first books are the language of the matter level scientists, because he has to speak with that language. But you notice that, Mr. Keshe, even when people brought up the dark matter and dark energy from his book, said we have to get away from that language. It does not use it. The black hole is the soul. It's what Mr. Keshe explained, drilling a hole in the universe, and or like a metal ball against a grinder. That's what's happening in the atmosphere. So that's what's happening in your soul. There's sparks radiating out. And you're right, Rick. If you could look past what our eyes see and see with the soul, you'll see a star inside your soul.
Yeah, essentially.
It's a star.
Some people are able to do that. That's the whole point.
Well, the first is the understanding that that's the truth of it. Mr. Keshe said, every creature in the universe looks more or less the same, but more or less, right? You are a star, but you're not the same mass as the star, whatever star is out there, different mass. Does that make you less? No. Yeah, in fact, its size means its energy is lower than yours. So you're smaller, but you have a higher energy level, relatively speaking, that kind of thing. What's the difference? The beauty of it. See, so to just say, well, we don't need to have any way to measure the beauty of the universe, especially at our level now, we need to get away from this language so that Mr. Keshe can talk with the language of the kids.
Yes, true indeed. Like let's look at this example. You brought up the beauty and so on. For example, we as humans we have all these different skin colors. You know, everything from brown and yellow and black and white and green or whatever. All these different skin colors, and you could say, look at each one and look at the beauty of each of these skin colors, how they all radiate in certain ways of beauty and so on. Or you could look at it that perhaps from the soul point of view, the soul doesn't even see that there is a skin color issue going on. It doesn't even think in those terms. It doesn't have the words to express those kinds of differences because it never occurred to the soul to even go there.
Well, okay, wait a minute. All right, look, that I don't agree with that. I think the soul knows very well what color the skin is and could change it at any time. If we, the physicality, at the soul of the physicality level, the Eve will chase after its own creator, you know, worship the correct God. Worship's not the right word, but you know what I mean. If, like you said, right? But look, a human being is a galaxy. So when we look out at all the different galaxies, nobody's saying, oh, that's a brown one, that's inferior, and that one's a blue one, that one's a good one. We just look at different galaxies and go, wow, that's really impressive. It doesn't mean the soul is not aware.
Well, that's right. And we usually don't, when we look at the stars, we don't usually discern that, oh, that's a blue dwarf, XYZ or something, and this one is a solar zippity-doo XW42 and so on. So we see stars as stars. They're all stars. We recognize a commonality of stars.
Yes, but they still look different to us, and the different galaxies look different. But they all look about the same. Again, we're not even seeing the whole galaxy. We're just seeing what our eyes and our instruments, which are just expansions of our eyes, can detect based on what they're tuned to. So we look at the galaxy, you look at the star, you think you're seeing the star? No, you're just seeing that little tiny bandwidth of what it actually is. So, but you're right, I agree. But again, it's one thing to say, yes, everything in the universe, every creature looks more or less the same. Doesn't mean that every creature is exactly the same. No, everything in the universe has its own pitch, which means nothing in the universe has the same pitch.
And there's also a bass note that is superior to all of those notes and pitches in that universe.
No, well, actually that's, okay, the creators.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. And you can look at the perspective from that bass note rather than all of the other harmonics that are
actually,
the bass note's the bass note. The rest of it is all fluff and built up on it and various interpretations and various interactions and all of this stuff. But the bass note is the bass note, and you can listen to the tune from the point of view of the bass note, or you can listen to the tune from the point of view of all of the piccolos and all of the other instruments all interacting and being part of the show.
And it depends on what you want to focus on.
Right. So this is my point. One can focus on the point of view of the creator if one wishes to really work toward that.
And the creators,
or we can stick with our point of view of the physicality, which is 99.998% of what we do and what we interact with in our lives and in our world.
Well, or we can use the soul of the man to interpret what we're encountering and understand that there's another level to what we're not seeing with the physicality. So
that's what I mean, yes.
Yeah, that's exactly what you mean. That's right. And only the creator is not just the fundamental at the baseline, it's the highest level frequency as well. It's the container, right? So it's an octave. It's trillions of how many octaves there are, but that's what it is. So it's both. It's the highest, it's the piccolo and the bass. And it's the same frequency, double, 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 double. But then you also have the 3-to-1. Yeah, so you have a 3-to-1 ratio, which is not an octave of the creator, yet it's still a plasma. So it's got its own fundamental. So that's actually carbon, really 12, half the carbon is 6, half of that is 3. That's as low as you can go. So the creator has not just created white light, it's put some blue in there or whatever the color the carbon is. To us, we see the CO2 as white because that's the same field strength as our emotions, or what our senses are tuned to, right? But the CuO is blue and the hydrogen, the CH3 is red, right? So you have that spectrum, right? But I mean, the point is the fundamental is now not just, there's another fundamental of the universe, the 3-to-1. And then there's the 4-to-1, or is the 4-to-2. So that's part of the white light. That's part of the, a replica of the original. But the 5-to-1 and the 7-to-1, which is nitrogen, which is very interesting because from our perspective, Mr. Keshe said nitrogen, that 7, it's the 14, carbon 14, is the basic fundamental baseline of the universe, of the unicos, I'm pretty sure, the unicos. So it's not the hydrogen, that's our level. It's the 14, 7. That's the fundamental baseline of the universe. That's the frequency we tune into to reach the soul of the creator. But that's there in our, I was saying this before, that's there in our amino acid. That so-called carbon 14 or the nitrogen is the fundamental that is being created at the center when the fields of the earth and the sun interact. It's 14. That's number comes because of the oxygen and the interaction of the oxygen and the carbon 14 or the nitrogen 14. Difference between 14 and 16 is 1 because it's 2-to-1 and then half of 2-to-1 is 1. So the hydrogen is the fundamental of our amino acid, but the nitrogen comes from the fields interacting from the sun and the earth, which is the field strength, the base fundamental field strength of the universe, of the unicos, right? But look, when you have a base fundamental pulsing, when you have that's the fundamental 1, then the next layer has 2-to-1. It actually has 1 beating at the same time and then a second 1 beating on its own. When you have the 3-to-1, you have the hydrogen or the 1, it could be the nitrogen, the 1 and the 3 times pulse. One of those 3 pulses will beat at the same time as the 1. And then there are 2 more pulses. And it goes like that. So 1 is the fundamental frequency of every other layer. It's 1 plus 1, or 1 plus 2, and 1 plus 3, and 1 plus 4. So that fundamental pulse rate exists at every level. So we already are the baseline of the creator. It's in our amino acid. Okay.
That makes sense, yeah. You know, maybe we should give others a chance to talk here, Mario. We've been hogging the conversation for quite a long time here, and I really appreciate it. Thank you for hanging out with me and being able to kind of work this through. There's something about this interaction that leads to that place of confronting the absolute in a way in ourselves and in our attitudes and everything else. So I think it's quite useful as an exercise.
Yeah, thank you for this venue for doing that, man. I really appreciate it. I know everybody else does too.
Right on. Okay, well, let's get a little bit of other input here and see if there's anybody still with us. Hello, I see Jedi has his microphone open.
Hello.
Okay. What do you think, Jedi? You want to give us some words of wisdom?
Someone wrote never ending. Someone wrote boring. Then they wrote universe is so beautiful. I just asked, please breathe, breathe, breathe. When we face this kind of topics, we should breathe a lot. It takes time. We mustn't quarrel. Language is based on this kind of system, dualism. You have question and answer. The answer, in fact, is the sword, is the knife, is pointing to exclamative point. That is the answer. So it's dictating, is saying. And the question is the hook. And the hook wants to catch the fish. He wants to catch the fish. He wants the answer. This is really the dualism within language and logic that we are using. Then grammar, then a period, then what comes later on with the structure within the language is based on this dual position. So we're always, it's kind of a game, just playing and going so up and down, one side, the other, saying yes, no, yes, no. But the sound, when you're breathing, and then you see that there is some kind of acceleration, and then you want to put something on top of it, and then something more, and then you want to say more and more, and it never ends, because you are adding, but the bricks are not in the right position, so the tower is going to collapse, because it is not in the barycenter, it's not inside the way it is, just going bending, and so it's going to fall. That is the moment we lose this kind of let's say a self-understanding of our position within the topic. We don't see anymore ourselves from the outside. We see, we want to point out something, we want to say it aloud, and we are inside, and we are missing our image, our position. We should be like sitting aside on the other side of the room, and watching and looking at us, and so then we find out there is this kind of problem taking place, especially within breath, because when you had but then, and then you go but if, it's adding more, and this adding more is addiction. It never ends. So you have people explaining and speaking, talking and showing and teaching, and it never ends. So that dimension of the silence that last time after the music, the dimension of that silence has to be placed within. Then you can vibrate something within silence. Anything you say, it's wonderful, because it is a manifestation of colors. That is wonderful. But within noise, we cannot express our thoughts, our ideas, because it is messy. It's disorder. It's chaotic. So this does not allow the understanding. This allows a kind of exchange between people, souls, that is a rough one. It's not delicate. You would never express yourself in this way with children. You couldn't. They would start immediately crying, immediately. Because this kind of feeling is what they feel. They do not understand all the words. They understand the sound. So it's going. That is within the musicality. Any language, it is within. And so this kind of breathing like this and adding, it's something that we should take care of, avoiding placing ourselves in the right rhythm and then use this faculty. It is a conscience. You sit there and then you move it. If you are not constant, then it is chaotic. That makes the difference. According to the sound, yes, there is a standing wave of God. And before this, there is a dimension of silence. Sound is sabda, the dimension of that silence, that is the container of every sound that exists is called parasabda. The teaching is there. Parasabda is that silence, total silence. And it has no number. Then, when you had sound, that is the number, is the quality, is the quantity, and everything that just is produced by the consequence of manifestation that you understand as a manifestation. But before this manifestation, there is parasabda. And there you just sit and you enjoy a meditative state and you perceive, you sense. That is the spiritual side of it. Then we can deal with matter. And so not saying that the answer is a dogmatic one, and so it's only this way, and it is the total explanation, and it is the truth. After 20 years, we discover it's not the truth anymore, and then after 20 years, we discover it's not the truth anymore, and so it's never ending. It's never ending. So you go back to the silence, and then you find all the little numbers, so the words. And these words are the keys to the understanding, to a limited understanding and interpretation of realities. Partial understanding that is helping you to reach the global image. So it's just listening. It's breath, breathing, sound. We say persona. Persona is person. Person. Why do you say person? Because it's personum, with the sound. You are a person because you are a name. You have a sound that expresses your identity within a vibration. So this is the understanding of what is happening below the surface, just taking care that within this silence, we enter this world and we know nothing about it because it is a dimension that we have to discover. Genetically speaking, we have something like 25,000 instructions in our DNA. We have 25,000 that are there. We end up with 2 million to 4 million instructions. What does it mean? There is a so with
Sorry, just lost the last few words there, Jedi.
It's not given memory. And memory, because we have these 25,000 bits of information, but we end up with 2 to 4 million. And so it's understanding, it's receiving, and transforming. So we add to our knowledge the teaching of this dimension. Of all the dimensions we come across, we know, we meet. So going back to the particles, when you were speaking about scintillation, that is scraping something. When you scrape, when scratch something, when you hit it with a hammer, it's going to show and so it's going to put in some way or sound, or it's a reaction. That flash is the passage of the particle that is creating it, because it's hitting the matter state, or the bubble, or gaseous state, or a liquid state. It's hitting it. So we could say that this field is producing and generating everything. And it is not, in fact, scraping it, it's caressing it. It's caressing it, because within sound, we know that harmonics work in such a way that you do not lose this kind of energy. It continues. And so within energy, it continues in sound, because the position is perfectly arranged. This will create sonoluminescence, it's called. For example, we see many examples. And
I think you're breaking up there, Jedi. Well, we're not able to hear you right now. Sorry, you're not able to hear right now, Jedi. I think it's more than my connection. Oh, I think he had to drop out there.
We hear you.
Okay, good. I'm not alone. Mark, you had a couple of comments and a question there. A couple of questions, actually. You mentioned, can I disagree about radon, a different take on this? Do you want to explain a bit about that, maybe?
No, I just wanted to ask you guys to keep the noise down. I don't mind a spirited debate, but it's 4 o'clock in the morning and some of us are trying to sleep. Just kidding. With the radon, I understand that they have world famous spas, like in Poland and in other countries in the Slavic areas, where people go down into salt mines and whatever people do in spas and get treated and so on.
Mm-hmm.
In these spas, there's a high amount of radon.
And yeah, quite often that's true. Mm-hmm.
And what they found is that the workers that work in these spas deep underground with a lot of radon are healthier and actually live longer lives. Now, we used to sell radon tablets in the United States until somebody took too many of them, and that was the way they got it off the market or something like that. But the point is that a small amount of radiation being exposed to it, apparently, and I'm not positive, it's actually stimulating to the immune system.
Yep, there's a doctor in the US, I believe it is, that's advocating that people take in radioactivity, actually ingest it.
Right. It's like tryptophan. They found a way to remove it. And apparently that was something helpful too. So with radon, I'm not saying, you know, and I don't know, but apparently these spas are world famous. People go there and report improvements. You know, I don't know why. But the workers that are living and working in these areas are actually healthier and live longer.
Yeah, there's a couple that regularly ingest radioactivity, and they went to live at Chernobyl because they say they live off of the radioactivity, that they actually need it, and it helps them to you know, perform better, and so on and so forth. So there might be something to that. Of course, we do use radioactivity in our body anyway. That's already known in certain types of radioactivity. Mr. Keshe has talked about that with the B vitamin. Is it B12? I think it is. Yeah. And other types of radioactivity is, like in the case of the B12, it's used for pregnant women, especially because it's good for reproduction. The radioactivity acts as a knife to slice the DNA in half so that it can reproduce. And it's the way it's done in the body, apparently. So perhaps it's better for, you know, cell production and cell replication and that kind of thing. I do know it was used back in the 1920s and 30s. I think it was quite popular, probably just before the atomic bomb became popular, and maybe radioactivity kind of took a back seat then.
And wasn't
got a bad name. Go ahead.
No, wasn't the original luminescence on those clocks with the green dials that used to glow in the dark, was that radon?
That was radium, actually. And what happened there was the women in the Second World War that were painting the radium onto the dials for the aircraft and so on, so they could see the, you know, specifications at night without having a light, and because it glows in the dark. And they would point the brush, like they had a little paintbrush, and to point it, you stick it in your mouth and just wet it a bit. It makes a little point on the paintbrush, so you can make, they had to actually draw the letters of, you know, onto some sort of odometer thing or whatever. And so they were getting lip cancer from this process. So, you know, obviously too much of a good thing is not a good thing in that case, I guess.
Right. Now, I wanted to add to your conversation, as far as Mario saying everything is plasma true, but then saying that the electron and proton doesn't exist. But I mean, that's in the books and things. And I mean, Mr. Keshe just said in the last workshop 264 that when the electron splits, it's basically the same in this universe, plus or minus 10–15%. So now maybe the electron, proton, and neutron is just an intermediate area, and he's going to take
No, Mark. It's just using that language so that he could transition people's thinking from a particle-based understanding to a plasma-based understanding. It's just that Mr. Keshe has to draw pictures on the walls of the cave, because when Mr. Keshe says, I want to show you about the universe outside the cave, everybody lines up to the cave to look for the pictures on the walls to explain it. What else can you do? Right? I mean, this is basically the situation Mr. Keshe is in. The proton, neutron, this goes back so many years, the division of the neutron. The unicos is a neutron. It divides into a proton, which has got a central core, and the outer layer, which is the container, and all the way the field lines cross, and all those layers drills holes in the universes and creates all the universes. They have their own souls. They have their own fundamental pitches. Every one of those pitches, beat rates, has the fundamental of the unicos as its initial fundamental beat. And then it's got 2 or 3 or 4 more beats, and but they're basically all plasmas. The universes are plasmas. They are neutrons that divide into protons and electrons. And, again, and then the process continues, and that's all it is. So it's
more allegorical than
yeah.
A strict definition of proton and electron. He sees it on multiple levels, so it's a scalar quantity rather than an absolute quantity.
Well, and Mr. Keshe's word for plasma really has nothing to do with the scientific version of what plasma is. It's completely different. It's a magnetic field, right? So that's not the same interpretation. But we understand that when Mr. Keshe uses the word plasma, he's not talking about high voltage electrons with positive and negatively charged particles, because that's not the correct interpretation. People who hear those words, Mr. Keshe said to Nicholas Chua directly, he said, what I say isn't always what people hear.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm trying to point out is that in the creation of matters, and not matter, not hard things, matters, fields, that the proton, electron, and neutron consist of what physics calls the initial fundamental particle, which Mr. Keshe calls the initial fundamental plasma, is consistent in the electron, proton, and neutron. Hello?
Sorry, we're getting some feedbacks through Sebastian there, so I had to mute. Go ahead.
What I am saying is that the proton, electron, and neutron contain the initial fundamental plasma, which is each one of them which is made up of the dark matter, the transitional matter, the antimatter, or the principal matter, and the matters fields, all in fields.
That's right. And if you look at what Mr. Keshe, at the beginning of that statement, Mr. Keshe said, how did he put it? Can you read the beginning? In the traditional science, or however he put it, you know the sentence I'm talking about. He's saying, this is the way the particle theory scientists say, and he uses those terms. But then he says, but when the neutron divides, it's a plasma. It's basically the same as what the electron is. It's not, these are not particles. They don't have absolutes. That's the whole point Mr. Keshe was saying before. Why do they think when they look at a star and they see helium or hydrogen or whatever, that these are electrons and protons that are the same size? What Mr. Keshe actually said was, what they're actually seeing is the energy signature of hydrogen, but they don't understand that. So they think it's a particle. So therefore the particles must be electrons, protons, and neutrons at the same size as us. But even before he said any of that, he said the solar system is a neutron, and it divides into a proton, and the planets are the electrons. And what they call the quarks and the other subatomic particles are also the moons and all that. They're plasmas. And then in Nicholas Chua's presentation, Mr. Keshe is very clear. Where those field lines are crossing, they're drilling holes in the universe. Now, that's a completely different perspective of the way the universe works from particle physics. There's no absolute values of anything. It's the division. How many times can the neutron divide? You know, Mr. Keshe said the unicos is finite, but it's dividing itself. So how many times can the neutron divide? Can the unicos divide? Okay, I suppose at some point there's it can't divide anymore. But for our purposes, it might as well be infinite, because beyond the imagination of man, how many layers there could be. But that's it. That's all it is. It's simple. It's not complicated. It's not physics. It's mechanics. The fields divide into 12 segments from the soul of the unicos. Those fields radiate out in a curved trajectory, which means they cross back on each other. Then they poke holes in the universe. The differential feeds back to the soul of the creator, leaves life. a plasma. In fact, those are magnetic fields that are radiating out. They're rivers of energy of magnetic fields. You don't get magnetic or gravitational plasma field until you have the interaction. It's the actual backsplash that's the universes. It's what's left over. It's the remnant from the two fields crossing and going in. And it's happening. And then they feed back to the creator. The creator gets an amplitude increase based on the feedback loop. That's another miracle of the universe. Why? The stronger feeds the weaker in turn feed back to create amplitude. So you get another layer. And the same thing happens. And in another layer. And every plasma is the same, but different, which is another miracle of the creation. So again, if you get away from the terminology of protons, neutrons, and electrons as particles, when Mr. Keshe talks about that, he says right there, in the matter level science, they call it particles. But in a plasma, it's a plasma that's divided and created a proton and the electrons. So it's a process, not an absolute. It's not, you don't have an electron that's the same everywhere in the universe. It's, you know, the Earth is an electron relative to the center of our solar system. The center of our solar system is an electron relative to the center of our galaxy, and so on. Yeah? And everything he said there and what you read, that's really what he's saying, even though he has to use a terminology that at least not be believed, but accepted by the matter level physicists, so-called. Of course, they didn't accept it, but okay.
So my final point, and then I'm going to become a listener again, is that there was a few articles in the Plasma Times about the eye and so on and so forth, and how the soul has created the eye as a porthole for the soul to move in and out. But at the same time, it created this eye to fool the man of physicality into somehow believing in the matter state is the reality. So it's making me think that the soul may, and this does sound strange, an ulterior motive to keep the man of physicality occupied in the physicality. But we're waking up to the fact now through Mr. Keshe and the technology and the teachings of soul and so on. So that sort of created a little cognitive dissonance. It created this soft tissue to actually fool the man, to think the physicality is the reality. I thought it was a very interesting point. Okay, I want to become a listener again.
Well, you know, if I can say, Mark, there's a workshop of the eye, one of the health workshops. That's really, really, really interesting. It's one of the early ones for 1 through 8 or 10. So, and that's really interesting, and that is really worth watching. But I think this is the Baha'u'llah's teachings, the hidden words. It's the soul of the physicality that's been doing the harloting, I think. I don't know. You're right. That is a cognitive dissonance, but
physicality is the Eve. The soul of the man is the creator.
Yeah, it's the one that's misinterpreting and deliberately so that they can steal or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I don't know the answers, but there's a consistent.
Basically, from ignorance. That's ignorance being not stupid, but just a lack of knowledge, lack of information, and that's part of our learning process on this planet. Is we go through experiences and learn that we are not the physicality, and that we do have this other aspect that remains hidden as long as we keep focusing on the physicality. And that's often a lifetime process. And that's why we have a saying that the only time that we meet our maker on this planet is when we die. But that's a fallacy, because you can meet your maker before that and still live through the process. That's the whole thing about it.
Lead man in the wrong direction, right? Outwards, looking for a creator out there instead of the one inside. Yeah.
Yes, and that's the whole diversion that's been set up. That's part of the game on this planet. If you look at it as a game rather than this serious thing that we take everything so seriously about our physicality, when to the soul, it's just it's about the same as throwing away a rag when we actually pass, and it's time to go and find another environment to manifest in. And it's not that big a deal to the soul, but to the physicality, it's the end of everything. Oh my God, I feel terrible for anybody who dies and blah, blah, blah. We don't consider that that's part of the transformation process for that being, and that it's actually a good thing. They pass on to another, part of a process of that evolution. And it's all part of the big picture. And we're so concerned about it because it's invisible to us. It's invisible world.
Reality is we're totally non-dimensional. Well,
you could look at it, what Mr. Keshe said. Sorry to interrupt. You could look at what Mr. Keshe said.
Non-dimensional, you mentioned.
Yeah, but there's also, it's an egg inside an egg inside an egg. When you die, you just hatch. You don't really die. And so, in other words, when a chick is in the egg, it lives a whole lifetime, and it sees up to the shell, inside of the shell, but it also can hear and interact with the emotional levels of the fields outside of the body and all the rest of it. So it's got experiences as a whole lifetime, and then it hatches into what? Another dimension? In a way, yeah, from its perspective, right? When it hatches, it's coming from its world inside the egg that's lived its whole life. And now, different colors, different everything, but it's really a different dimension. See what I mean? But that's, I think, that is Mr. Keshe's teaching. It's an egg inside an egg inside an egg. Huh?
Yeah,
so.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you leave this set of clothes, then you're free to go and do the work in the universe, hopefully correctly.
Yeah, you have to hatch. And it's just the shell left over. Isn't that what the Klingons believe? I think that's a Klingon thing. Right?
I think the chick that's in the shell gets to have one breath to break out, is the way I understand it. There's a tiny air pocket inside the shell, and it gets to have that breath before it pecks its way out. And it's sort of a life and death situation, I guess. I guess if you need to, you'll get away from the prison find any means that you have at your disposal. If it happens to be a beak and you have to take a breath first, then I guess that's the way you do it. Anyway, we're getting on in time here and thinking we should wrap things up. But does anyone like to carry on for a while longer? I'm open to that as well. Is there any more questions or comments or points to bring up that we should be doing so at this time?
Well, I have maybe an announcement. I think it's going to be published. I've submitted an article to the Plasma Times, and I haven't gotten an email back since I sent him back. I got it proofed, and he sent me back the final version and a release form, and I was told that it would be published in the next Plasma Times journal. So, but then I sent him back that final proofed and release, and I haven't heard from him yet, but as far as I know, it should be published in the next Plasma Times journal.
Oh, that'd be great to see, Mario. Good for you. Thank you for doing that. Is that going to be a Plasma Scientific Journal entry then, or just an article that you made?
I think I sent it to I know there's two different ones, right? There's the Scientific Journal. I think it's the Plasma Times journal that I sent it to. I think it'll probably do a preview of it tomorrow. Maybe. I'll see if maybe it didn't get published, because I know there was a lot of other things going on in the background. So maybe Mr. Keshe saw it and said, no, don't publish this. I don't know.
Well, they're very, I'm sure it'll get published. It's just they're very busy, intently trying to do that. And it could be piled up with trying to get it formatted for the journal in time and so on.
I sent it a few weeks ago, and we've been back and forth a couple of times to it.
Okay, it'll probably be in there.
Yeah, so yeah, it'll probably be in there. Yeah, so anyway. And again, thank you.
Thank you,
everybody, for tolerating my, I know, I got what Jedi was saying.
And myself as well. Well, this is something comes up. And we've done this a few times. And, you know, I think back in some of the words, and but I also know that sometimes it takes some chaos and working through the chaos to find the pearls and gems that are buried within it. And I'm thankful that we both are able to tolerate each other to this point where we work it through. We work it through and we do come to some common understanding. You know, I think we get a little closer every time we have these conflicting kind of rapports.
I always think you have your hand on the delete Mario button, you know. At any moment, you know, so what happened?
No, maybe a few times when we first met, because I wasn't sure what I was getting into there, but I've appreciated your participation here for quite some time, Ariel, and you've been here for quite some time, since what, 2013 or 14, probably close to the beginnings.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. And again, thank you for this venue. It's really fantastic.
Right on, thank you. Any more comments before we wrap up here?
You think someday, Mario, you'd grace us with some guitar?
Ah,
yeah,
sure.
I've been trying to extract that from him for some time. He keeps wanting to teach us in a musical way, but he won't play the music to teach us. So it's a challenge, Mario. You need to come up with something to make us feel better and accept your theories through music, because I'm sure you have wily ways of imparting the same information, but through your tunes rather than your tones.
That's really interesting, because the music is plasma energy packages. It's not the guitar that makes the music. It's not even the fingers or any of that. It's the energy packages that come off, and they store emotions. And even when it's recorded on a CD, you lose some of the intensity of it, but you can still feel the emotions. Music definitely is an emotional level communication. You know, it's the universal language, really. Yeah. So, but I'm not sure my music, you guys would like my music, you know. And the last 2 years have been so strange. Actually, since I met Mr. Keshe, my whole life has been so strange. But career-wise and all, I've been very strange situation at the moment, and I have been for the last year and a half, something like that. So I'm trying to get back, and okay, doing the best I can. So yeah, I'll try. Yeah, I have a YouTube channel. I'm on the internet all over the place. You know.
Yeah, we just need a bit of personal coddling here.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
We'll keep bugging you, and one day you will play something, I think. We need a demo. We need some sort of demonstration of what you mean by the crossing of the fields, or the interaction of the 3 and 4 and so on, you know, just a hands-on demo, what do you call it? Tabletop demo with music or sounds. Call it sounds rather than music, and then we don't have to associate it with particular music that we like or dislike, rather than we just listen to the sounds for what they are and try to assess, you know, the effects and so on.
I've made numerous attempts to try to, I played the notes of an amino acid, and I added calcium and some other things. I have some recordings of that somewhere. And, you know, it's too subtle. It's not, it gets too localized, I think. When we listen to the music, unless we realize that there's plasma interactions. In other words, you have to, in your mind, do what the whole point of what I was bringing up, to start reanalyzing everything. The music is not sound waves of particles bouncing off the particles, getting converted to electrons and creating positive. It's not that. It's plasma interactions. And we are connected, no question. You know, so, you know, I agree with everything you said there, Rick, too. You know, I mean, I really, you know, I disagree with it. Just try to open a different, to reanalyze. This is something that is, I've seen this, the only field that has re-evaluated every aspect of the phenomenon is the medical. No one in the energy has decided. Everybody's saying, okay, you have the plasma and that gets converted to electrons. We already know all about electrons with flowing of volts and watts and amps and all that. And not one person has actually gone back and said, well, okay, wait a minute. If it's not electrons, what is it? Because it's real. Why, you know, and someone who knows about following a schematic look at the plasma flow instead of the electron flow and reanalyze it as a plasma. No one. And it's really, people are making the same mistake with the periodic table. They're making the gas materials and they're counting protons, neutrons, and electrons. Instead of, that's an energy pulse. This is an energy pulse. How do I get a differential energy pulse for what I want? It's really, I showed this 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago. If I can plot it on the grid, I can replicate any element, because it's the difference between this and that. You want gold, give me the number, give me the Gantz, that's that, and the difference of those, when you put them together, gives you, you get gold, you get whatever you want. It's the division of the neutron, it's the essence of creation. And no one has been doing that I can tell, especially with the energy. But, you know, I mean, we know the food, nothing passes the wall. It's a feedback loop. So then what is calcium? If it's not so many numbers of proton, we need to really start reanalyzing that. Let's get away from looking at everything as protons, neutrons, and electrons, numbers of proton, neutrons, and look at it as pulsing beats, energy packages, you know? Okay, thanks again for ranting here.
All right, thank you, Mario.
Could I ask Mario one more musical question?
Surely.
You know, sometimes in classes, Mario, there's not a lot of interaction within the classes. Now, Rick, of course, this program never has that problem, as we saw tonight, and so on. Now, where I used to work with some people, we used to sing the scale. And I'm thinking of singing the scale. As we know, your voice box is the point of interaction between your soul of the man and the soul of physicality. So as those two start scraping in the voice box, because of the fact I'm thinking, as in some marriages, they become estranged, separated. And we know our soul of physicality is the lion and the soul of the man is the lamb. And there's an estrangement there. There's a separation there. So by singing the scale and warming up the connection, do you think there would be more interactions in class? And
well,
once we did that, we'd sing a Brahms or a Mozart or something else, just to warm up.
Well, there's no religion, no philosophy where they don't sing, you know, the chanting and the singing and all. However, I think it's like what Mr. Keshe was saying about meditation. If you really understand, you don't need to do that. You can bypass the whole process. Do we need that? I think it's the point, not that it's not correct and it doesn't work, it does. I mean, you know, but we need to realize that it's not just the vocal cords that are scraping, everything's scraping. Your soul exists as scraping of the fields of the physicality, scraping back into the center of that's what the soul of the physicality is. It's all light. It's all scraping the fields. It's all music. It's all sound, heat, magnetic fields. It's those four things Mr. Keshe really summed up very well there. Even with their language, that's it. That's happening at every cell of your body. Mr. Keshe said the soul of the man, the creator, the soul, is the composer and the conductor. That is not a musical metaphor. It's literally what is going on. It's creating energy fields that are scraping against each other at certain beat rates. And this one interacting with that one creates a third beat rate, which creates, interacting with the others creates a larger structures and larger structures and larger structures, builds up to the body of the man, right? And that's all that's going on. It's all being conducted every second. So I can't do it, but at least I'm starting to, and we all need to really, the color of my eye is my soul creating a frequency, pulse rates that look brown to me and to most people. I have brown eye, but that's only because, my eyes are playing a B flat or whatever the color of that is. And they are colors. To one entity, they don't hear the sound, they see colors. They would see colors. When we look into the night sky and we look at these stars and galaxies, we're looking at spaceships, we're looking at souls, we're looking at entities. That's what it looks like to us. What does it look like to them? Mr. Keshe was drawing, hey, look at the dog here. I see a fish over here with the galaxies, right? We don't, we see all these, we just see the cells of the body of a galaxy, like this picture on the board right here, right? But what does it look like to another galaxy? It sees the totality, like the ring magnet. So is that a dog or some other entity? What does it actually look like? And it's got a soul. And you can see the flower of life in this particular one, right at the center there, there's the soul. And it's got these fields radiating out, and there are cells. And where they're crossing, those are stars, which are cells. And
okay, how does this tie in with Mark's question?
Well, that's ringing out pitches. That's a symphony going on there.
Okay, but does he's talking about having people singing or vocalizing during class in order to kind of loosen things up or
well, yeah, it's like singing a song in church. It can't hurt. It's not bad, and it's correct. And sure, why not? But I think we need to think more broader. That those are nothing but plasma interactions. The whole talking is plasma interactions. It's music. Whether it sounds like music to us or not is not the point. It's all plasma field scraping and harmonizing, and dissonance is not a bad thing unless it's disrupting the fields of your heart or something like that. We would call it a poison or a radiation. See, so in other words, I'm trying to say what the ancients called the music of the spheres, because they believed it was a sphere inside a sphere inside a sphere inside a sphere, which is what I believe now. But whatever, it's universal. We, try to find the frequency of your own soul would be, just as good or whatever. I'm just saying, I think it's a little bit narrow to say, well, if we sing, then we're doing this. Well, making dances is the same thing. Scraping your hands together is the same thing. Clapping your hands.
Well, that's the thing, to do something other than just sit on one's butt and not say or do anything, which is fine too if one is able to be present and not actually say or do anything, which is a hard thing to do in itself. But I think Mark's saying, what can we do to kind of break the ice and get people to start interacting? Because sometimes there could be, silence is great. Jedi's talked about that and emphasized that, and it is very important. But sometimes the silence is just a stunned silence, and people are just not willing or able to get the energy together to interact with others, to actually participate, rather than have it delivered to them spoon fed or whatever, you know, as a non-active participant. It's hard to get people to actually engage.
No, Mr. Keshe uses the phrase, the wisdom of silence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, that sometimes it's not necessarily a bad thing that you don't have that. You know, people are thinking, you know, and
well, that's absolutely right.
You know, so again, you know, and it's not, you know, what people don't understand about jazz mostly is that what they don't realize is the jazz musicians, and we talked about this years ago, Rick, and I thought it was, you know, a coincidence or an analogy. It's not. It's actually the same. It is literally the thing. You're playing with other musicians, and what Dizzy Gillespie called you make that thing happen. That where you're not. My teacher used to call it. My composition teacher used to call it talking to the angels. You're all of a sudden, you're not in the room anymore. You're not playing in front of an audience. You're talking to the angels. You're in another, it's a euphoric thing. This is what the jazz musicians are trying to do. They're trying to create a central score. We're all playing and and it sort of answers the question you asked about are the birds conscious, you know, when they're in the flock. We're now a flock of musicians. We're playing, but I'm not thinking about the notes or what I'm playing. And in fact, if I make a mistake, I hit a wrong chord or something, and then I have to think about my fingers, voop, I'm back down on the stage. I'm not talking to the angels anymore. And the whole
right.
The whole field collapses. Everybody goes, well, what happened?
Yes. That's my point. When we start to micromanage or start to see all the little details and so on,
that's right.
Then it falls apart.
Right, it collapses the field, right? And so the souls, you know, you lose the flock, right? And so we try to get back into it, you know, and I, you know, I mentioned this before years ago when I first started making the reactor, the trillion condition reactor, that was so powerful. And I was playing with these Mauritian guys, and we were doing a 3-month contract. And to make that thing happen, if you're playing 6 nights a week with the best guys you can get, Branford Marsalis said, if 3 times a week we can make that thing happen, it makes being a jazz musician worth it, you know, putting up with the music business and all, because that euphoric thing, we were making a thing happen every single time we played by the second month. The reactor was amplifying the whole thing. I put a little bit of the Gans powder in a little thing in my pocket. Went to the gig and we were playing. All the guys knew what was going on, and it was like the guys still talk about that gig. The manager, Chinese manager, said you guys were using some kind of voodoo. They believe, you know, these guys are sort of African. I was like, Mauritius, I didn't know it was African. No, I didn't know I was playing with African guys. You know, anyway. The point is, you know, these Chinese, they believe in that kind of thing, and there was something going on in that club, and it was amplified by the reactor, right? So, Mark, yes, of course, but if you realize that you're just creating a plasma field and you're trying to link, it's the purpose of everything in the patents. What is the goal? Create a living soul that connects everything. This is the reason of the core group, the universal community, and the world community, or whatever you call it, right? The earth community. 3 layers. This is, and Mr. Keshe has already removed himself from the center of that, which means there's an empty space there. And this is so that the humans on this planet can connect. We are connected, but we're not in harmony. We're not acting as a flock. And that's how you travel in space. You create a flock. And then you're already talking to the angels. You don't have to do anything else.
Good point. I think that's correct.
Right? So, Mark, yeah, why not? Anything that helps you connect. But you need to remember that what's the goal? The goal is to open a central core, to create that soul that connects you guys, whoever's in the teachings, whoever's there. And it's not just them that it'll reach. It'll reach whoever, other people around the world, you know, because the reactors were linked years ago. The Gans materials have been made all around the world. Those are amplifying the fields. That's the reason Mr. Keshe did it that way, you know? And so, you know, yeah, sure. Music can do it. Gans reactors can do it. People can do it without any of that stuff. So just I would leave it like that, you know? Of course, music's used in every culture, everywhere. You know, just metronomes beating. You'll find it, you know, metronomes beating, the water drops, the Chinese torture, water drops. It's more about the constant tempo than the actual water hitting your forehead that drives people crazy, because it links to your fields. Same thing like when they do a disco beat at 80 beats and they slow it down, people start passing out, you know, going to diabetic comas and stuff like this, because, you know, you synchronize with those, you know, beating of drums. Just turn a metronome for a while. You'll find that when you're typing in tempo. You can't help it, you know, or it'll drive you crazy and you got to turn it off. You know, this kind of thing. So, you know, you can do it with metronomes. You can do it with just tapping your foot, you know, smiling. They're all the same thing. Different, same, but different, right? It's all that. So, you know, yeah, why not? I mean, I'm a musician. I live to make that thing happen, you know? That's why, you know, Mr. Keshe is like, and the funny thing is, when Nicholas's presentation, The Flower of Life in 7 Musical Tones, and Nicholas started going into the musical, I was like, this is ridiculous. This has nothing to do with Keshe plasma physics. And as I'm thinking that, Mr. Keshe comes on and says, this has everything to do with Keshe plasma physics. I was like, what? I mean, to me, I didn't really make the connections at all. And it took me months to realize, oh my God, it's the ratios, the harmonic. That's all it is, the simplicity of it. Then when 2 notes combine, you get a 3rd note. That's the root note of that entity. And, you know, and what I've been always trying to do as a jazz musician, you know, it's all the same thing. I couldn't, you know, and to realize it took me months. You know, I have what I call the oh moments. The, oh my God, I got it. And then the, oh my God, what an idiot you are. You didn't see that before because of the simplicity of it, you know? Oh, you know, that kind of thing. But,
oh. So I was checking my microphone. Sorry to butt in.
No, cut me off.
Thanks for adding me to the...
Thank you.
So I was just seeing if my microphone worked, gentlemen.
Yeah, I wanted to bring you in here, Richard, and trying to get a word in edgewise. So go ahead, and I see that you had your hand up, and I'm sorry that you've been on YouTube and commenting there. I haven't been paying attention to the YouTube. I've been preoccupied here.
Oh,
sorry about that. But go ahead. Let's hear what you'd like to say.
I should put some headphones on to stop the feedback. But I used to be a strong cam frogger. I haven't been there for many years, but I do understand live streaming, and you might get feedback at the moment. I apologize for that. I'll have to get some headphones.
No, it sounds really clear right now. It sounds great right now. It might be just me feeding back, but it's good.
Very good to hear. You guys from First Impressions seem to know a lot more than I do. But I have been following Keshe's principles for at least a good 5 years now. I used to study a lot of light work. I don't want to give myself a label, but I was writing in YouTube just before that how the plasma reactors are a good example of how we could all live. They like to work with no negativity around them, and they like to work simply. And as much as we can complicate things, but we can expand in conversation to try to help people all the time and go off on directions everywhere. But basically everything works with no negativity around and keeping it simple. And the more people in the area that are thinking like that, and correct me if you gentlemen think if I'm out of line here, but because you two certainly haven't don't show any signs of negativity at all. But maybe I'm just trying to reassure myself that if we all, no, go on, you can.
Well, I was just going to say, some people would say that we had some signs of negativity. Some people were either bored or upset and so on and so forth. But yes, I see your point. Go ahead.
Do you guys get much negativity from church groups or even fanatical conspiracy groups? And I know you wouldn't let that affect you if you did, but how do you respond to people like that?
Generally don't have too much trouble with that. Some people might come in and make a comment or something, but generally people, if they're in a radically different perspective and point of view, they just don't interact. It doesn't register with them. It doesn't, there's very little, conflict in that sense. I used to see more in terms of what we call trolls and comments, negative comments, and various negativity from certain elements. There's much less of that now because I think there is that feeling of positivity that it comes through in almost every comment and every thing that people input. There's almost always gratitude attached to it. And this makes a huge difference in the way the Keshe Foundation operates compared to most other organizations. And you'll find that people are just full of gratitude for this knowledge and for this chance to
absolutely
expand and to elevate themselves and to elevate others and to create a new world and all of these things. And
can you remember the first time that you discovered it? And I'll ask an even deeper question. When you discovered it, did you have the feeling that you already knew it?
Yes,
did you feel like you
definitely that was part of it. And some of the earlier training I've had in my life and earlier experiences were reflected in the Keshe Foundation and still are in many ways. I see the same basic threads running through Mr. Keshe's teachings as some other prime teachings in certain esoteric groups, let's say. But well, that's basically it, I guess. As far as myself goes, I remember encountering his teachings and very excited and thankful for that it was actually there. There was a person saying it's time to stop the burning for mankind, and it's time to make this huge jump forward and into space technology and into stopping the weapons and all this kind of thing, which was pretty radical 10 years ago and still is in many ways. We're accepting it more and more as a distinct possibility now as the Keshe Foundation becomes more strong as a plasmatic entity in the world, I guess. What would you say about that? Is there more you'd like to?
Myself.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree with everything you just said, to be honest. I was thinking while you were saying it that it reminds me of early religions, how, to me, I discovered Reiki many years ago by accident and didn't even want to discover it. It was something that was forced upon me. But then when I was like 14 years old, and then again when I was around 21 was when it was really rammed in home to me. And I tried, you know, I was still going through school. So, of course, Reiki and school didn't work with each other. So I didn't even know what Reiki was until even after 21. The word Reiki didn't come to me. But I learned about energy, and plasma and Reiki are the same. I don't even like using the word Reiki. To me, it's taboo. It's just another word for another form that any religion or continent or form of people could give any word to natural force, healing energy, right? So I use the word Reiki for simplicity, like people use the word God and devil to try to describe how it can be described in even much more in-depth ways, which we won't go into. So I discovered, getting back to what the original thing, so the Reiki symbol itself is an electrical diagram that I found. I realized it's like a wiring diagram. The chokurai, especially the symbol chokurai, which almost looks like a Carlton Football Club symbol. Which every time I draw it on my hand, everyone thinks, "Oh, you barrack for Carlton." No, it's all right. I'm barrack for Collingwood. That's the Magpies. Off track again. So the Keshe reactor group, the design for the reactors is very much based on that symbol and the coil work, how the coils work. Yet I can remember, and I can still do it probably tonight if I try it again, using a pyramid shape of copper. With a similar coil on top, I can get a 12-volt globe to start lighting up, bang. As long as you have the coordinates of the pyramid in the right position. So then it reminds, so there's still religions and religions and religions that have all had their design. They all figured it out, but they all sort of had their own pattern. So maybe I'm just thinking, there's no right or wrong here. This is only discussion for amusement. For all of us, not for me, and self-education. What I'm figuring out, what I'm feeling is that there's more than one design of this. We've got the Keshe plasma reactor group, we've got that design. But I think way back, there was more than one design that was across the continents. Maybe. Well, what do you guys think on that? And pardon me, Rick, there was someone else that you were talking with someone else, and I don't want to be rude to that gentleman that's gone quiet since I've sort of joined in the conversation, because I sort of butted in on what you two were talking about. And I felt rude there.
No, it's fine.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I would like to see that symbol you're talking about, though, but I'm fine listening to you.
It's a simple Google. You can just Google Chokurai, Chokurai. It's one of the first Reiki symbol.
I really know nothing about these symbols, although I am wearing a Keshe Plasma t-shirt with some symbols on the front, which are supposed to represent chakras, I think.
Yeah, well, yeah, they all represent. Okay. I don't know what they represent in English. I know what they represent in another language, but I don't know how to put it into English.
I know it's supposed to create mind, soul, and body balance of some sort.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, you mentioned only one kind of reactor with the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group, but that's not true. We've had literally hundreds of different kinds of reactors over the years being shown and demonstrated and talked about and so on. Personally, I've had probably 200 types of reactors, different styles, different ways of interacting, everything from gas to GANs to nano coatings and high voltage and low voltage and no voltage and all kinds of reactors, just myself. And I know others have also investigated many dozens, if not hundreds of types themselves as well. So we're actually into the many thousands of types of reactors that we here.
I did not know that. I did not know that. So I don't mean to insult. I did not know that.
Virtually every, I mean, some people have worked on a reactor systems for literally years and they keep adding to them. We had Mark at one point with the whirling things and reactors and arms and legs and everything else. And it looked like almost like a human being, basically. There was so many arms and legs on it. And that was, his experience of his reactor combinations, but it wasn't one reactor. It was actually a multitude of reactors, and it was over a period of time. There was transformations that went on. It started out one way and ended up somewhere else. And this is typical in the way that we do our processes here. So there is quite a bit of variety. There might be other whole varieties and lines of reactors that we haven't covered. I'm sure there are, as there's as many reactor types as there are stars in the universe. Then that certainly is a lot of combinations.
It's very possible. It's very possible.
Anything is possible when it comes to reactors, I am convinced. It's a matter of placing our attention on it and focusing as to what exactly we want to get out of it and finding the process to go about that. Create the conditions, as it said.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to say, Richard, before we shut down here?
I'd just like to say thank you for letting me to join in. And,
well, you're welcome.
I look forward to learning more and sharing more in the time. I'm a better listener than I am a talker. And I just wanted to come in and say good day tonight, because I watch on YouTube as much as I can. But I live on an island in the middle of Bass Strait, in between Victoria and Tasmania, down here in Australia.
I live in an island as well, right beside the capital of Victoria, here in Vancouver Island as well.
How so, coincidental is
how about that for a coincidence? Yeah,
that is coincidental. Vancouver, yeah, sweet.
Yeah, it's Victoria's the capital. Yeah, well, thanks, and you're welcome to come back into the Zoom here if you like and participate. That would be great to get some.
I'd never heard about Zoom until I read the comments in the YouTube below, and it said where to join. I went, Zoom, yeah. So this is the first time I've been on Zoom.
Okay, yeah. This is how we get together to share documents or videos and that kind of thing. And
the quality, there's no lag or anything. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it is. It's a good streaming service, and we rely on it, as we have now for a couple of years. So it's been fairly good to us. Excellent. A little funky at times.
Excellent darts, mate. Excellent darts. All right, gentlemen, I'll say good night. I'm going to try to find my way out of here somehow. And
okay.
It's a little bit new.
All right. Definitely going to wrap things up now. We're up to 4 hours, so that's pretty much my limit. And
I came in.
Okay, and once again, I thank everyone for your participation, whether it's actively or passively. It's all good, and it takes both. It takes two to tango. It takes someone to say and someone to listen. So lots got said today, and a lot of listeners too. So that's all good, and I'm happy with today's show. Thanks a lot, especially to Mario for being so Mario, and interacting with us here. And I'm gonna keep bugging him for some music sometime soon. Think about it, Mario. You can change the world with your music here, which I'm sure you already do anyway.
I tried that once. It didn't work, but I can keep trying. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Mario, have you ever joined Acoustic Jam? Do you play guitar, do you, Mario?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Excellent. So do I, mate. I play slide and drums. Might catch up for a jam one day. Good night, gentlemen.
Okay, maybe you should coordinate that somehow. All right. There's also the Keshe music and art class in the private teachings, once a month class.
Nice to know.
And that's a lot of fun. We get into some interesting topics there, and can always use more musical people. All right.
Well, thanks. It's nice. I've been slipping back out of this stupid fourth dimension. It's nice to come back up to something that's a bit higher and hang with some better people, because you all sound like better people.
Well, I don't know how much better we are, but we certainly are participating in life. So
high vibe.
I'm loving it. Thanks everybody for being part of the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group for Wednesday, February 27th, 2019. See you here next week in March of 2019. All right, I think we're going to end the show for now. And once again, thank you, everyone.